I'm your bedtime historian, and if you think being too young for war ever stopped anyone from marching off in stiff boots, think again. Imagine standing on a cracked train platform with a paper ticket clutched in a trembling hand. The air tastes of coal smoke and promises, but the Feldgrau uniform on your back weighs more than any school satchel you've ever carried. You were 16 yesterday today. You're a soldier whose mother still keeps a bowl warm by the hearth. Why did they say yes when you asked? Why did the man with the clipboard look the other way? If stories like this keep you wondering what bravery tastes like when served cold, maybe press that like and subscribe button. No bugle call, just a quiet tap. It helps this sleepy voice wander through history a little longer. Ever found an old letter and wondered who never got to write the next one? Now pour some tea, pull the blanket close, and drift with me back to the muddy edges of a world gone to war. You stand among a row of boys who still smell faintly of farm fields and borrowed shaving cream. Around you, the drill sergeant barks something about discipline, but your mind drifts to your mother's bread, cooling on the windowsill. There's a letter in your pocket, half finished, each line more formal than the last, each word scratching at feelings you don't dare confess outright. Some of these letters never find their way home. Sometimes they stay folded in jacket pockets when the jacket gets folded too. The barracks are cold tonight. Your bunkmate, barely older than you, whispers that he lied about his age too. He's from a village you've never heard of, a place with more cows than boys. He shows you a photo, his sisters lined up like dolls in stiff dresses, none of them old enough to understand why he's gone. You run a hand along the rough seams of your uniform and wonder if it'll still fit if you ever make it back. Historians still argue whether these uniforms were meant more to hide the dirt or the boys inside them. Somewhere down the hallway, boots slam the floor in a staccato rhythm. Another drill. Another inspection. Another reminder that you've traded your school satchel for a rifle that feels heavier each time you lift it. They teach you to stand straight shoulders, square chin up. But in the quiet moments when the sergeant's voice is just a dull echo, you feel the weight pressing on your bones. You dream of bread crusts and soft pillows of dogs barking at twilight, and your father's laugh at supper. Funny how none of that feels real anymore, like a postcard from someone else's life. Each night you scribble half thoughts on cheap paper. You tell your mother you're well fed and brave, that the uniform fits fine, that your bunkmate snores too loud. You never mention how the cold leaks through the blankets, how your feet itch with lice, how your stomach knots at the thought of what tomorrow's orders might be. There's no scholarly consensus on just how many of you lied about your age. Some records are blurred, the ink smudged by trembling hands or deliberate silence. A few boys got caught, sent home to wait another year. Most did not. You close your eyes and drift somewhere between the smell of gun oil and candle wax. Outside, someone hums a tune you half recognize, something about springtime and orchards in bloom. You clutch that melody the way you clutch the half-finished letter. A promise, or maybe a lie, but comforting all the same. And as sleep pulls you under, just for a moment, you imagine stepping off that train again, ticket-torn uniform folded away in a chest you'll never open. But dawn always comes, and with it, the whistle, the boots, the barked orders that turn boys into shadows in Feldgrau. A thin drizzle greets you at dawn, seeping through your cap and dripping cold along your collar. It's your first real glimpse of the front, a maze of mud that chews boots to pieces and swallows any trace of where you came from. They tell you the trenches protect you. Safety, they promise crouched deep in these muddy veins, running like scars across fields that once grew wheat and wild poppies. Now there's nothing but broken earth and barbed wire that hums when the wind moans through. You step carefully, feet squelching, in a slurry that never dries. The mud eats your socks, sucks at your soles, and leaves a smell that clings to skin no soap can scrub away. You envy the old-timers who know where the planks sit, hidden the makeshift duckboards someone nailed together with more hope than skill. Still, even those vanish under rain. Earlier, you were someone's son. Here, you're just another pair of boots dragging lice and damp misery through a living grave. Some soldiers joke about trench foot, how it turns your toes to jelly if you stand too long in the sludge. Others just light cigarettes and pretend they don't notice. One lad shows you the trick smear whale oil on your feet every morning twice if you can steal enough from supply. But the tin runs out fast, and so does the patience of the sergeant when he catches you barefoot trying to dry your socks over a guttering candle. You shuffle sideways through dugouts that reek of unwashed bodies and kerosene lamps. Rats skitter along sandbags piled higher than your head, bold enough to sniff at your pack if you sleep too soundly. Some say they grow as big as cats out here, fattened on scraps and darker things you don't name out loud. Historians still debate whether the worst enemy these trenches held was the shell, or the sickness creeping through every cut and blister. Some say it was the waiting that did it. Hours turned to days, turned to months in this damp limbo where a cough could echo louder than a rifle crack. You pass by a stretch nicknamed Suicide Corner. No sign to mark it, but everyone knows. Step too high, stand too tall, and you tempt a sniper watching for the careless silhouette. The mud doesn't care whose name is stitched inside your coat. Now and then, the rain eases and the sun dares peek through clouds as gray as your uniform. That's when you see the lines, clearly miles of tangled wire shell holes that steam after the morning frost melts away, and the men huddled in corners like stray dogs waiting for scraps. Your hands stay cold even when they're deep in your pockets. When you pull them out, they're covered in grime, your nails rimmed with earth, and something darker you choose not to name. The sergeant yells for another working party sandbags, to restack wire, to mend a new latrine, to dig where the last one overflowed. There's no glory here, just a spade and the soft squelch of another inch of muck. A mate leans over, grin cracked by frostbite. He tells you he's carved his initials into the duckboard near the firing step. A small act of rebellion, or maybe just proof he existed here at all. You promise to look for it tomorrow, but tomorrow in the trenches is a slippery promise, one that dissolves like footprints in the rain. There's no scholarly agreement on how men kept sane here. Some wrote poetry in matchbooks. Some carved chess sets from crate splinters. Some just stared at the horizon, daring it to blink first. You pick your coping ritual, a whistle, tucked deep in your coat, to remind you of the station master's call that first morning you boarded the train. It's foolish, but it keeps your mind from sliding entirely into the mud. Another shell rumbles far off, and the trench shudders like a living thing. You crouch low boots, buried to the ankle, wondering if the mud will remember your shape long after you're gone. Maybe it already has. Somewhere beyond the wire, dawn slips into day, another day of waiting, digging, freezing, scratching. Another day, the mud holds you tight, a cradle of dirt that pretends it's your friend until the whistle blows. A pale slice of dawn peeks through the trench opening as a whistle's sharp note cracks the half-sleep clinging to your bones. Morning roll. Call your daily ritual of pretending you're whole awake and unafraid, while frost bites the tips of your ears and turns your breath to ghosts drifting through barbed wire. You stand in line, boots, numb eyes, tracing the curls of steam rising from the tin mugs clutched tight by your mates. The sergeant's voice bounces off sandbags, stacked in lopsided walls, barking out names with a rhythm that feels older than the mud beneath your feet. When he calls yours, you answer too quickly, fear that silence will make him look twice. Beside you, a boy with cheeks too soft for a bayonet wipes his nose with a sleeve blackened by weeks of sweat and trench smoke. He didn't sleep last night. None of you did. The shelling teased your eyelids open every hour like a cruel lullaby, pounding the sky in dull, distant beats. You tip the mug to your lips, bracing for something warm. But the coffee, if you can call it that, tastes of stale chicory and tin more grit than comfort. It's just enough to scald your tongue awake before the next barked order drives you to line up for inspection. Some lads tuck tiny photos inside their tunic buttons, wives, sweethearts, mothers, who swear they'll pray you safe home. You keep yours folded flat in your breast pocket, a picture of your village church, its steeple pointing like a compass to a sky that feels impossibly far away now. Historians still puzzle over whether these roll calls were meant for discipline or survival. Was it about counting rifles or reminding boys they still had names? Some say it was both a ritual stitched from fear and frost that held the line tighter than any barbed wire. The sergeant passes boots, splashing slush onto your trousers. He lifts your chin with two fingers, checking for whiskers you might have forgotten to scrape off with a dull blade. You feel his stare weigh the shadows under your eyes, the tremor in your shoulders you try to swallow down. Behind him, the cook rattles tin pails of something that might pass for breakfast. Gray lumps of bread, a smear of jam if you're lucky. The line shifts, boots scraping duckboards slick with last night's rain. You think of the letter folded in your pocket. Should you tell your mother about the roll call, the tin mugs, the taste of burnt chicory that coats your tongue? No. Better to write about the sunsets, the brave talk among lads who say it'll all be over by Christmas. Christmas came and went 2 times now. A bird perches on the trench lip wings, trembling in the cold. It's too thin to eat, too quick to catch, but you watch it anyway, because anything alive that isn't lice or rats feels like a prayer. The lad beside you mutters that his mother used to feed sparrows, crumbs from her apron. You nod, imagining your mother doing the same, an apron dusted with flower hands, warm from the hearth. They say the routine keeps you sane. Wake roll, call stale coffee, shiver through orders, pretend your boots don't leak. But when the shells come later, and they always, do you wonder if the sergeant will call your name tomorrow, or if the morning roll call will stumble a single echo where your answer should have been? Some scholars argue that the roll call was the true battlefield, where fear and hope stood shoulder to shoulder in thin gray coats daring the mud to bury them both. There's no proper answer, no neat footnote for what happens when a name goes unclaimed. You cradle the tin mug closer to your lips, hoping for warmth that isn't there. Your breath fogs the rim, and for a moment you can almost pretend it's tea, fresh brewed in your mother's chipped porcelain cup. You taste it in your mind, sweet milky poured, by hands that still believe boys come home whole. A shout snaps you back. The sergeant's moving down the line again. Boots shift mugs, clink the line, reshuffles, like cards no one wants to play. And when your name rings out tomorrow, if it does, you'll stand here again, spine straight, lips, dry breath, pale in the dawn, waiting for a mug of bitterness and a promise of nothing warm but the steam. The roll call always comes. The trench always answers back. A letter in your pocket. A dozen more, tucked deep inside a battered satchel, creases worn soft by cold fingers, edges smudged by damp and dirt. Letters home, they say, keep you tethered to something cleaner than this trench. You sit hunched on a sandbag pencil stub, scratching at a scrap of paper borrowed off a mate who's already written his own lie for the week. You start with Dear Mother, because it feels safe, practiced the same as the last. You tell her you're warm enough, well-fed, enough, brave enough. None of it is true, but the truth would just gather black lines of censorship before ever reaching her kitchen table. A cough from the next dugout breaks your thought. One of the older lads hacking up something that'll never see a doctor. He's writing too ink-pooled in the corner of a page, torn from an old prayer book. You wonder if he's telling his wife about the lice you both pick off your collars at dawn, or if he's promising he'll come home before the leaves fall. Your pencil drags a line through your neatest word. It doesn't matter. The censors will read it before your mother does red pencils, scratching out troop numbers, names of villages, any whisper that might give the enemy a clue where you rot in the mud. Historians still disagree on how many letters got through whole. Some say it was luck. Some say it was the censors just too tired to read another page of half-lies and hidden truths. Beside you, a boy with ears too big for his helmet pulls a folded postcard from his sock. He's drawn a picture on the back, a tiny sketch of a farmhouse smoke curling from its chimney. He says his mother keeps chickens in the yard, fat and noisy, so different from the rats that skitter between your boots each night. You press your pencil down harder. The graphite breaks a sharp snap, swallowed by the wind whistling down the trench. You curse under your breath, but no one hears. Everyone's too busy telling lies on paper, desperate to keep the picture of home brighter than the gray sky above. You sign your name, the way your father taught you, careful, proper, each letter standing straight like a row of new recruits. At the bottom, you add a promise you can't keep. I'll be home by spring. You doubt it, but it looks nice there, tucked between careful lines about dry socks and sturdy boots. No man's land yawns just beyond the trench wall, a strip of ruin so close, yet the letters you send feel like they're crossing an ocean. Some make it. Some vanish on lost trains, caught in pockets never emptied. Some drift back weeks later, return to sender, scrawled across your careful script. A mate leans over, teeth chattering, as he jokes about what he'd write if the censors didn't care. Tell my da the mud's colder than the old man's scowl. Tell my ma'am her stew would be worth desertion. He laughs, but his eyes don't join in. They flick to the roll of barbed wire beyond the parapet, then back to the page he's never going to finish. Historians argue if the letters mattered, if the pages carried hope, or just gave the lie shape enough to cling to. Maybe they were prayers, folded into envelopes slipped under railcar doors, left to chase steam and smoke all the way to kitchens, where mothers pretended not to read between black lines of redacted truth. You fold your page carefully, slide it into an envelope smudged with yesterday's thumbprints. The sergeant will collect it tonight, a sack swinging at his side like Santa Claus for a holiday that never comes. Maybe your letter will reach your mother's hands while she's kneading bread, the flour catching in her knuckles, the way mud catches in your boots. Maybe she'll believe every word. Maybe that's kinder than the truth you can't write down. You tuck your pencil stub behind your ear, lean back against the cold wall, and close your eyes for a moment. The paper's still warm from your fingers. Outside the dugout, the the drizzle picks up again, drumming soft secrets against your helmet. Somewhere, someone coughs. Somewhere, another boy signs his name to a lie he hopes will keep the kitchen warm for another week. The trench shifts around you, alive with secrets written in cramped hands and censored by eyes that pretend they don't know better. A letter home is never just a letter. It's a lifeline stretched too thin to hold. A rustle in the dark wakes you, small feet skittering across your pack, a faint squeak drowned by the soft drip of trench water. Trench rats, they call them, like it's a quaint joke. But when you see them, eyes gleaming in the candlelight, bellies swollen on scraps and things you'd rather not name, you know they're more than pests. They're part of the trenches now, same as the mud, same as you. You shift your legs, careful not to kick over the tin mug beside your bedroll. A rat freezes mid-scurry nose, twitching whiskers, slick with rainwater. It's dragged in from the duckboards. You've heard the old hands say these rats never go hungry. Some even say they grow wise. Learn which boots to chew through. Which packs hold the sweet ration, biscuits, precious lumps of sugar you'd trade for a clean shirt. You grab a stick someone whittled down from a broken crate. A half-hearted swipe, and the rat vanishes between sandbags, a fat tail disappearing into the darkness. Beside you, your bunkmate stirs mumbling about a dream, where he's back in his mother's kitchen, the smell of onion soup stronger than the stink of wet socks and unwashed coats. He rolls over and snores again, oblivious to the shadows sniffing at your boots. There's no scholarly agreement on whether the rats were a curse or a crude blessing. Some diaries whisper they gave the boys something to do target practice, with knives, shovels, anything at hand to break the monotony between shellfire and roll calls. Others say the rats were a grim reminder of what the trenches fed on when men fell, where no stretcher could reach them. You lean back, listening to the tiny claws tapping over your tin helmet. You wonder if your mother would believe you if you wrote home about the rats fat and sleek as alley cats back home, bold enough to nibble crumbs right from your pocket. Better not. Some truths stay buried with the lice and the frostbite. A mate once bragged he'd caught 3 in one night, strung them up on a bit of wire by the mess tent. The cook wasn't impressed. Rumor says some men tried frying the biggest ones when rations ran thin, but the taste, greasy and sour, turned even the hungriest stomachs. You poke at your pack again, shoving it closer to your chest, like it might guard you better than the rifle propped by your side. Above you, the dugout roof drips in steady beats, the muddy walls pressing in like the ribs of a beast trying to breathe you in. Somewhere behind you, another rustle, a tiny squeal, 2 rats arguing over the scrap of stale bread you dropped earlier. You think about trying to scare them off, but what's the point? They always come back bold as brass, sniffing at your boots, even as the shells thud miles away. Historians love to argue about tactics and generals, but they rarely dwell long on these fat gray kings of the trenches. Some records survive letters with lines crossed out, but the rats left in proof you weren't imagining them. Proof the rats were witnesses too silent and plump, watching boys fade into the mud they made their kingdom. You wonder if when this all ends, you'll carry the twitch of whiskers in your dreams. Back home, you'd shoo mice from the pantry, your mother shrieking at the sight of a tail slipping behind the bread bin. Now, a tail flicking across your chest barely earns a sigh. You're too tired to care, too used to sharing your sleep with tiny hungry thieves. Your bunkmate shifts again, muttering in his sleep. You envy him, that dream onion soup steaming on a wooden table safe and warm. You wish you could dream about bread and butter instead of the rustle and squeak that never leaves you, even when your eyes snap open at dawn's cold whisper. You close your eyes, pressing your pack tight to your belly. The stick you used to swat at the rat rests beside you useless as the prayers tucked in your coat pocket. Somewhere above the trench, the wind hums through the wire, singing the rats to sleep, while you count each heartbeat, wondering if you'll still feel their tiny feet tomorrow night. The candle guttering near your boots flickers once, then dies. In the dark, the rats reclaim the trench like they always do, quiet conquerors in the mud, more permanent than any soldier's boots. You wake to a sound you can't name, a hush so deep it drowns the drip of trench water, the shuffle of boots, even the squeak of the rats that never sleep. It's the silence that follows a shell burst the breath the earth holds before it exhales another round of thunder. But this hush curls deeper coils around your chest, like an invisible wire. Some call it shell shock. Others don't bother with names, they just watch a man's eyes, glass over hands, tremble as if feeling for something that isn't there anymore. You see it first in the older lads, the ones with whiskers gray, before their time fingers, that twitch near their helmets as though they're checking for holes only they can feel. A boy near you hasn't spoken for 3 days. Before that, he cracked jokes about rum rations, and trench lice wrote letters to his sweetheart on scraps of cardboard he nicked from ammo crates. Then came the barrage, a single night, when the sky ripped open, rain of metal and mud pounding so hard you thought the world might split. When dawn limped in behind the smoke, he sat with his back to the sandbags, mouth open, like he'd forgotten how to close it. Historians argue still whether shell shock was fear, nerves, cowardice, old words for wounds no bandage could bind. Some say it was betrayal by the brain, others that it was the soul's last defense when the noise grew too big for flesh to hold. You watch the silent ones and wonder if you'll join their quiet company. Nights when the rum rations run out and the rats stop their squeaking, you hear the tremor in your own breath. You wonder if it'll crack one day, split you like a shell splits soil. A sergeant snaps his fingers in the boy's face, shouts something about pulling it together. But the boy doesn't flinch. His eyes stay fixed on some private ruin only he can see, like he's still watching the sky break open in that endless thunder. You know better than to write about this in your letters. There's no place in a mother's kitchen for talk of men who flinch at shadows, who jump at the pop of a match striking in the dark. Better to write about the smell of bread that isn't here, the sunrise that sometimes smudges the trench with a hint of gold if the fog lifts long enough. One night, you catch your bunkmate sitting bolt upright, eyes wide in the pitch dark. He whispers your name once, just once, then digs his nails into the dirt floor, as if the trench might swallow him whole if he lets go. In the morning, he jokes about a dream of roast chicken and plum pudding, but you see how his hands shake when he laces his boots. There's no proper fix. Some men get sent home eyes empty medals, pinned to tunics they'll never wear again. Some stay here, shadows in uniforms, staring down at the mud as if it might speak sense back to them. Some keep walking one boot in front of the other, whispering prayers that sound more like apologies. Researchers still debate whether the silence inside a man's head is worse than the shells outside. Maybe they're the same thing, noise that never stops echoing no matter how far you crawl from the front line. You light a cigarette, the tip glowing like a tiny star in the dark. Smoke curls up to meet the damp roof beams, dancing in the drafts, that slip through every crack. You watch the boy beside you, the one who doesn't speak anymore. His eyes track the glow of your cigarette, but he doesn't blink. You want to pass it to him, share the warmth, the illusion of calm, but your hand won't move. Some gaps can't be crossed, not even by a glow in the dark. A cough rattles down the line of dugouts, the sound swallowed fast by the hush that lingers when the shells stop. You wonder if your mother would know you now, the tremor in your voice, the way you flinch when a boot scrapes the duckboard too suddenly. You grind the cigarette stub into the mud, watching the ember fade. The boy beside you closes his eyes, but doesn't sleep. Neither do you. The hush holds you both like an unwelcome lullaby. In the trenches, some ghosts wear uniforms, still breathing, still counted at roll call. But when the sergeant shouts your name, you answer with a voice that shakes proof you're still here for now. Proof the silence hasn't taken you yet. You sit hunched on a plank that's never dry, eyeing the tin bowl cradled in your hands like it might offer more comfort than it ever does. Frontline rations 2 words that promise warmth, but mostly deliver disappointment, ladled with a bent spoon. Tonight's supper sloshes against cold tin a watery broth that tastes faintly of cabbage if you squint your tongue just right. A heel of bread so dense it could pass for trench sandbag stuffing, and coffee if you're generous enough to call the black swirl in your mug by that name. You dip the bread, hoping it'll soften before your teeth crack on the crust. Some lads swear they saw weevils in the flour sacks last week. Nobody mentions it now. Hunger has a way of making small, crawling truths easier to swallow than the cold air pooling around your boots. Your mate beside you mutters a joke about the soup, how it's so thin you could read tomorrow's orders through it if you hold the bowl up to the lantern. He dunks his bread twice, then offers a bite. You politely refuse. There's never enough for seconds, and you both know it. Historians still squabble over just how bad the rations really were. Some diaries mention rare moments of sausage or cheese smuggled up the line, like stolen miracles tucked under greatcoats. Others insist it was mostly this gray stew-black bread, a rumor of coffee brewed from burnt barley and chicory root. You taste the bitterness, the grit left at the bottom of your mug. It lingers on your tongue, stubborn as the trench lice that nestle in your seams. You wonder if your mother would recognize you now, leaner than she last saw you, hands calloused, not from plow or hammer, but from hauling crates and sacks through frostbitten nights. Your bunkmate flicks a crumb to a rat darting under the duckboards. It snatches the offering with a boldness you envy fearless, well-fed, unbothered by the distant growl of artillery that vibrates through the tin canteen wall. You sip again, pretending it's warmth sliding into your belly. It never is. Some nights, rumors slip down the line, like steam someone's uncle in the supply corps, someone's cousin with a hand in the officer's mess. Maybe tomorrow, you'll see real coffee, a slab of pork fat, a square of chocolate so sweet it tastes like a memory. But those rumors float away faster than the smoke from your cigarette curling over the parapet and vanishing into the same dark sky that hides the shells, waiting to come alive at dawn. You scrape your spoon along the bottom of the bowl, pretending it's worth the effort. You think about writing home, telling your mother how you miss her kitchen, her thick stew that clung to the ladle, her bread warm from the oven, buttered before you could sneak a taste. But what good are letters filled with longing? Better to tell her you're eating well, that the soup is hearty, the bread fresh. She'll sleep better that way, believing her boy's stomach is never empty. There's no scholarly consensus on whether hunger or fear cracked more soldiers in these ditches. Some argue the mind breaks quicker on an empty stomach. Others say the body feeds on itself when bullets don't finish the job. You reckon they're both right. You push the empty tin away and wipe your hands on your trousers, though it won't do much good. Grease and mud cling to everything out here. Boots buttons the creases behind your ears, where the cold wind slips under your collar. Your mate lights a match, shielding the flame with his cupped palm. For a moment, the little flicker feels like rebellion warmth. No ration list can measure. No sergeant can ration away. He grins at you through the smoke teeth yellowed, but strong enough to bite tomorrow's crust. You lean back against the sandbag's belly, pretending it's full mind, drifting toward the stories. You'll never tell your mother the taste of mold in the bread, the rumor that the soup's meat came from a mule that never made it back from the supply run. The bits you swallow down with the broth because hunger makes truth and lies taste the same. The wind hums across the parapet, rattling empty cans strung up like makeshift alarms. You close your eyes, picturing Sunday dinner at home, a roast you'd carve with your father's knife, a gravy boat passed twice around the table. Here all you pass is the tin bowl, the spoon, the rumor that maybe tomorrow will bring something warmer than bitterness and mud. A whistle shrieks down the trench, slicing through the damp air, thick with the sour tang of stale soup and boot leather. Gas mask drill. They tell you it's routine, nothing to fret about, but the word alone knots your gut tighter than any shell burst ever could. You scramble to your pack, fingers stiff from cold and grime. The mask is there, folded and crumpled, a flannel mouthpiece, and a pair of glass eyepieces that fog if you breathe too hard. You yank it out, fumbling at the straps, with hands that remember too many stories of lads caught one breath too late. The sergeant paces up and down the line, shouting the drill steps like they'll save you when the yellow-green clouds really come rolling in. Filter on. Strap tight. Breathe shallow. You repeat the steps in your head like a prayer, though even prayers get muffled inside the rubber and canvas cage you slap over your face. Historians still argue whether these crude contraptions were bravery stitched in khaki or a false promise of survival. Some memoirs swear by them, claim they saved thousands from choking on poison mist. Others read like death sentences written on thin canvas, one cracked eyepiece away from blind panic. You pull the mask over your head, the stale scent of old sweat and damp flannel pressing against your nose. Your breath rattles inside the filter, echoing in your ears like a drum you can't silence. You blink the glass, fogging quick, until the sergeant's shape blurs into a shifting silhouette, framed by sandbags and rusted wire. Beside you, a boy yanks at his strap curses muffled under the rubber hood. His eyes dart to yours, wide and shining. You want to tell him it's fine, just a drill, but the words die in the filter, lost in the hiss of your own breath. A rat scurries over your boot, fearless as ever. Even poison clouds won't scare them off. Someone once joked that the rats would inherit the trenches when you're all gone, your masks discarded like shed skins. You almost laugh, but the rubber mouthpiece catches the sound and turns it into another ghostly echo rattling between your teeth. The sergeant claps his hands, barks the next step, masks off. You fumble with the straps, the elastic digging at your ears as you tug it free. Cold air rushes in sharp, with the scent of mud kerosene, the faint promise of dawn somewhere behind the clouds. You check your mask for tears, your fingers tracing the seams. It's an old model, some cracks around the filter, where damp has eaten through the canvas. You think about asking for a new one, but you know better. Supplies don't stretch far when the front line swallows boots and boys faster than the quartermaster can keep count. Some say the worst part isn't the gas itself, but the wait. The long hours staring at the horizon, nose twitching for that first whiff of something sweet and wrong, a scent you'll never forget once it fills your lungs. A mate once described it like cut grass and mustard, summer gone rancid. He didn't get to describe much else after that. Researchers still debate how many soldiers learned the drill well enough to survive when it mattered. Some claim the drills were more ritual than real defense reassurance to keep the line steady, to keep you from bolting when the wind shifted just so. You fold your mask back into its oilskin pouch hands, moving slow, careful not to crease it more than it already is. The lad beside you shoves his back into his pack, eyes darting at the sky like he's daring the clouds to change color. A sergeant lights a cigarette, the tiny ember bobbing in the early dusk. He offers you one, and you take it grateful for the scratch of tobacco in your throat, the warm crackle that pushes the ghost of the mask from your lips for a moment. You think about the letter you'll write tonight. Maybe you'll mention the drill call, it a precaution, a routine bit of training. Leave out the part where your hands shook so hard the strap slipped twice. Your mother doesn't need to know how a boy can stand in mud up to his ankles, boots rotting on his feet, and fear a gust of wind more than any bullet. You flick ash into the trench, the ember flaring as it falls. Somewhere down the line, another whistle blows someone's late with their drill. Or maybe just one more practice before the real thing drifts in, silent and deadly as the fog that rolls across no man's land when dawn creeps near. You suck the last drag from the cigarette lungs, filling with something that almost feels like defiance. For now, the mask stays folded in your pack, a promise a lie, one more bit of canvas between you and the clouds waiting to steal your breath. Your toes throb long before the dawn finds you. Frozen feet, just two words that slip so easily from an officer's mouth. But out here, they bite bone deep. You wriggle your boots under the dugout blanket, trying to find a scrap of warmth in leather, stiff as bark, and socks damp from yesterday's trench water. You remember the stories you heard on the train to the front boys, laughing that they'd freeze before they'd ever see real battle. You thought it a joke, then a foolish quip to pass the hours. Now, with frost crusting your eyelashes and breath puffing like a broken kettle, you realize cold is a more patient enemy than any bullet. It creeps quiet into your marrow, numbing you from the inside out. You try stamping your feet under the blanket, but there's nowhere for the warmth to go. The dugout walls ooze moisture. The ceiling drips a steady tap that feels like a cruel reminder the world above is no less miserable. You curse under your breath softly so you don't wake the lad snoring beside you, knees curled to his chest like a child in his cradle. Historians still debate if frostbite claimed more toes than barbed wire ever did. Diaries tell of men who'd peel off a boot only to find blackened skin flesh so dead it felt like candle wax. Some lads joked about it, traded tales of missing toenails like trophies. Anything to laugh at what would otherwise make you scream. You pull at your socks threadbare, patched with scraps of sacking you bartered from a supply crate. The sergeant barked last week about whale oil, told you to rub it in thick every night. But your tin ran dry days ago, and the last drop sits stubborn under your fingernails, a useless smear that won't save your feet tonight. You wonder if your mother would scold you for not wearing thicker socks, for letting the damp get in. You picture her by the hearth, darning old wool, by lamplight, never imagining her boy's toes would turn blue under a foreign sky. Beside you, a rat squeaks, near your heel sniffing for crumbs. Even it flinches at the cold fur bristling as it darts back under the sandbags. You envy its small warmth, its instinct to burrow deep, hidden from the frost that gnaws at your bones. Outside the dugout, a lad mutters curses through chattering teeth, stamping his boots in the sludge. He found no firewood tonight. What little the quartermaster scrounges is snapped up by the officers or burns too quick to warm even a tin mug. So you settle for your own breath, cupped in gloved hands that aren't thick enough to keep the chill from slipping in at the wrists. Some scholars claim the cold did more than rot feet. It rotted resolve. Nights spent fighting off frostbite made men question why they stayed crouched in a ditch at all. They wrote home about the bullets, but not the nights when a single toe gone numb made a boy dream of leaving the line forever. Court-martial be damned. You shift your boots under the blanket, flinching at the pinprick tingle pain. But a good sign. Pain means your toes still answer when the cold calls. You whisper a half prayer to the dugout shadows, promising to keep stamping, to keep moving, to keep waking when the dawn whistles blow. Above you, wind whistles through gaps in the sandbag roof, humming a lullaby no mother ever sang. You count your toes in your head, touching each one with your mind's eye, as if that alone could keep them warm. 1, 2, 3, 4. You pause at 5, willing yourself to believe you'll count all 10 when the sun crawls up over the trench lip again. A mate stirs beside you, kicking your shin by accident. He mumbles an apology without waking breath, rising in soft clouds that vanish in the cold drafts sneaking through every seam. You envy him, that sleep his dreams, likely warmer than any blanket you'll find tonight. You reach for your boots, fingers stiff as the laces you tug loose. For a moment, you think about leaving them off, letting your feet breathe. But the sergeant's warning echoes in your ears. Keep them on or lose them altogether. So you tighten them again, pressing cracked leather against skin that protests with a sharp sting. There's no warm hearth waiting here, no fresh socks by the bed. Just your feet, your breath, the hiss of wind that promises the cold will outlast any man brave enough to think he can outwait it. You close your eyes and pretend you feel a flicker of warmth under your blanket, but the frost always finds you one numb toe at a time. The word leave rolls through the trench like a rumor, half believed soft, almost impossible, under boots caked in a week's worth of frost and filth. You hear it first in a whisper between two lads digging out a collapsed dugout. A muttered promise that maybe, just maybe, your name's on the list this time. You cradle the idea of it all day. The train waiting at some rear station. Steam clouding the platform. Your uniform still damp with trench muck, but your pockets full of scraps of hope. A pass stamped by an officer who barely glances up before flicking his pen, telling you you've earned a week away from the wire. There's no scholarly agreement on how many men really got their leave when promised. Some diaries read like love letters to the brief escape. Others just list the names of lads who waited but never boarded the train, their passes buried with them under no man's land. When your name's called, your chest tightens until you can't feel the cold creeping into your boots. The sergeant thrusts a slip of paper into your hand. 2 days to pack what little you have, if packing's even the word, for rolling lice-riddled socks into your spare shirt and hoping it looks respectable enough when your mother opens the door. You don't sleep the night before you go. The dugout feels tighter than ever, wet canvas closing in as your mind drifts miles down the line, past the shell-scarred fields to a station lit by gas lamps waiting to swallow you back into a world where you're not private anyone, but just a boy who forgot to wipe his boots before stepping into the kitchen. The train lurches awake long before dawn. You stand with your pack clutched to your chest, boots frozen to the platform boards. The steam hisses a warm snake curling under your collar, and for a heartbeat you let yourself think, this is it, real warmth, real escape. Inside the carriage, lads sit shoulder to shoulder, eyes darting from mud-caked boots to windows fogged by breath and dreams. No one talks much. Words feel too risky, like saying them aloud might break the fragile promise that you really get to leave. You think about what you'll say when you see your mother's face at the door. Whether you'll tell her how thin the soup really is, how your bunkmate never woke up after last week's shelling, how the rats grow fat on secrets you can't write home about. Or whether you'll just stand in the doorway, the same boy, but not smiling stiff as the Feldgrau draped over your shoulders. Historians argue, if leave changed anything, if 7 days of half-warm beds and soft bread could really mend the cracks the trenches dug into your bones. Some say it only made it worse, sending boys back with fresh ghosts in their eyes and pockets stuffed with goodbye kisses they'd never spend. You watch hedgerows slip by the train window, snow-dusted fields where no wire snarls the earth, no duckboard rots under frozen boots. Cows doze in distant pastures. Smoke drifts from chimneys that haven't seen a shell burst since the last century. It looks so absurdly normal, you almost laugh, chin pressed to the rattling glass. And then you're there, your station, your village, your mother's house where the kettle squeals like it never learned to hush. You cross the threshold boots, scraping clean on the stoop. Inside, the warmth smacks your face soft as a slap. She fusses at your collar, pretends not to notice how you flinch when the floorboard creaks like a distant shell. The pub door swings wide that evening. Neighbors nod, clink glasses in half whispers. You're home now. You nod back, fingers wrapped around a glass of ale that tastes more bitter than the chicory coffee back at the line. But when the night closes and shadows find you, even here, cracks in the hearth's glow, where the trench seeps back under your fingernails, cold in the gap where your boot heels rest on the familiar worn rug. And then before you know it, the slip of paper calls you back. Another train, another platform. You stand there in the dawn, chill uniform, pressed by your mother's iron, but the mud, waiting to reclaim it before the sun climbs high. You climb aboard. The whistle shrieks. The smoke curls around your cap like a ghost. You glance back just once, the village falling away into dawn mist. A boy steps off the train, but the soldier rides back, leave folded in his breast pocket, crisp as a lie. It's the hush before the push, those dark trench hours, when a lad's courage tastes more like stale rum than raw grit. The bottle passes from hand to trembling hand, splashes amber warmth on cracked lips, and tongues gone numb from frost and fear. Rum rations, they call it, a dull biting medicine, poured from dented tins into tinier mugs that clink like whispered prayers against the chill. Your fingers wrap around the cup. The smell alone could set your stomach turning back home, sharp, harsh, soaked through with a burn that sits too long behind your teeth. But here in the filth and fog, it works its trick, unfurling your shoulders, softening the edge of the thought that tonight might be the last time you watch the flares pop over no man's land. Some men swallow it all in one reckless gulp. Others sip slow, savoring each drop, like it might hold them upright when the whistle blows. The older lads grin as they pass the bottle again, jokes spilling thick about how rum has done more for bravery than all the brass hats back in command tents ever did. Historians argue endlessly if the rum ration made heroes or fools, if the muddy courage pressed between your ribs came from your mother's prayers, or the last mouthful of cheap spirits dripped into your belly. Some diaries read like toasts, raised to the bottle itself. Others curse it as false hope, a crutch that buckled the moment boots hit the fire step. You tip your cup back the warmth, scratching down your throat like splinters. For a moment, it drowns the taste of sour trench stew and chicory grit. You almost smile at the thought your mother's face if she saw her boy knock back raw Navy rum like a seasoned dockhand. She'd slap your wrist, scold you for your father's bad habits reborn in you. But out here, you'd toast your father too, if it meant 5 minutes warmth behind your ribs. Your mate beside you burps a laugh, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He nods at the bottle. Another you shrug, push your mug forward. He pours with a reverence usually reserved for communion wine. The drip splashes your knuckles, burns cold skin raw, but you don't mind. Anything to chase the frost deeper into the dugout walls. A rat skitters near your boot, pausing as if it might ask for a sip. You kick at it, half-heartedly, toe numb inside cracked leather. The rat's bold enough to linger another drunk soldier in the mud, waiting for scraps no one bothers to guard anymore. Rum dulls the edge of the dawn raid. It smudges the line between here and there, between the whispered talk of home and the hard frozen earth waiting when you climb the ladder. Some men mutter their letters home in the rum's warmth lips, loose with half-lies they'll never write. Tell her I was brave. Tell her I didn't flinch. No one tells the truth in rum's company. That's the point. The bottle circles back again, tin against tin metal, clinking under the soft hiss of the night wind that slides over the parapet. Somewhere up the line, a flare spits white fire into the sky, one brief electric ghost flickering across the broken ground. You'll crawl over, come dawn. You savor the last drop tongue, tracing the rim of your mug for a sweetness that isn't there. The afterburn settles into your chest, fighting the cold in your boots and the tremor in your hands. You flex your fingers, testing how steady they feel. Good enough. Steady enough. That's all the rum can promise. Historians still dig for the measure of that promise. Was it a kindness or a cruel trick? A swallow of comfort that made men stand tall for an hour longer than they could have sober. Some say it worked. Others say the bottle was just another ration that ran dry too soon, leaving only empty cups and muddled courage behind. You hear the sergeant bark a warning, his voice soft for once, an odd hush, like he knows no man needs shouting now. The bottle tucks away, hidden again, behind ration tins and torn sacks. You swallow the burn one last time, rub a thumb along your lips, as if the warmth might linger there longer than it should. Beside you, your mate laughs again, thin, brittle, but real enough to push back the dark for another heartbeat. You join him, the taste of stale rum, blooming on your breath, louder than the cold, braver than the truth. You crouch low, under the wire boots, sinking into mud that's colder than the rum, still warming your chest. This is no man's land, just words, until your belly grazes the frost-brittle grass, and your elbows find every frozen stone between here and the next crater. No one speaks. The only sound is the hiss of your breath, muffled by a scarf that does nothing to keep the damp from creeping down your collar. You press your chin to the ground and shuffle forward an inch, then another, the barbed wire above, snagging at the tail of your coat, like it wants to keep you here forever. A flicker of light crackles overhead, flares drifting slow, and white cold stars that hang too long, too bright, showing every shadow to eyes peering through scopes somewhere just beyond the ridge. You hold your breath. If you move too quick, the flare's sharp hush could pin you to the earth like a beetle under glass. Historians still argue whether crawling through no man's land at night was courage or madness. Some letters say it felt like drowning in a field with no water, just the hush of your heartbeat drumming against the mud. Some say it was worse than the trenches. No cover, no walls, just earth and wire, and the promise of a bullet that might not even know your name. You shift your weight, boot heels pressing deeper. The mud sighs around you, sucking at your ankles like a mother's lullaby turned sour. Beside you, your mate grips his rifle tight enough to leave splinters in his palm. He doesn't look at you. No one dares meet another man's eyes out here. Too much truth in that glance. Too much of a chance you'll see what's waiting if the next inch goes wrong. A rat scuttles past your sleeve belly, dragging the frost. Even here, they thrive, tiny scouts, slipping between wire and shell hole fat from the scraps men drop when fear loosens their grip. You almost envy it the way it moves, without trembling, bold as brass, in a place you crawl through on borrowed nerve. The ground shifts under your knee. Old shell crater, half filled with water, that bites at your wrist when you steady yourself. You flinch breath, catching in your throat, so sharp, you taste iron behind your teeth. Somewhere ahead, a whistle chirps one sharp note that says, "Stop. Listen. Wait." You press your cheek to the cold earth heartbeat pounding into the mud. In the distance, machine guns mutter like teeth chattering in a skull. You wonder if someone's watching you through a scope, a finger resting light on a trigger breath, calm as yours is ragged. Some scholars remain puzzled by why so many crawls ended in silence, two sides huddled in the dark, waiting for dawn to do what they wouldn't in moonlight. Maybe the wire and the mud were guardians crueler than the bullets. Maybe the frost fought for both sides equal in its indifference. You inch forward again, belly pressed flat. Your coat snags on the next strand of barbed wire, a tiny scratch across your sleeve that feels like thunder in your skull. You tug it loose, fingers numb in the icy air, praying the metal doesn't rattle enough to whisper your name to the man on the other side. Your mate signals a flick of fingers you catch in the corner of your eye. Back forward. You can't tell. You nod anyway. Sometimes nodding is enough, a silent pact that says, "I see you. I'm still here." You don't dare speak. Words don't belong here. Only the hush of breath and the soft tear of cloth on wire. Above you, the flare fades, smoke drifting like a ghost into the frozen dark. For a heartbeat, you feel weightless, alone, under a sky so big it could swallow this whole stupid patch of churned earth. Then a distant boom rumbles. The ground shakes your ribs in their cage. The wire rattles, singing a soft metallic note that echoes louder than any shout. You press your face to the cold again, lashes crusting with frost. You think about your mother's kitchen, warm bread windows, rattling with summer storms instead of gunfire. Here, the only storm is steel and wire rain that falls in shards of shrapnel. You shift once more, arms trembling with each inch you claim from the dark. In this crawl, every heartbeat feels stolen, every breath a quiet dare to the frost and the wire. And if you make it back, boot-soaked coat, torn belly, empty of rum, you'll lie to yourself that you'd do it again tomorrow. Because no man's land only belongs to the men who keep crawling. A tattered envelope flutters in your pocket, another letter that won't ever see the soft light of a kitchen window or the careful hands that once packed bread and cheese into your satchel before you were a soldier. Letters that never arrived. Some get torn in a shell blast, some left behind in pockets folded shut forever. Some just vanish lost between the front and home, as if the distance itself swallowed them whole. Tonight, you hunch under a corrugated roof, patched with burlap sacks, and a prayer that the frost won't bite through your collar. You slip the letter out, creases soft, as old cloth corners dark where your thumb rubs them each night. You wrote it 2 weeks ago on a scrap of ration box pencil, scratching promises your mother would have read 3 times over before tucking it in the bread tin with the others. You read it again under the glow of a guttering candle stub. I'm warm enough. The rations are fine. We'll be home by Easter. Lies wrapped in polite lines so neat they almost make you believe them yourself. But the envelope never found a train, never slipped through the fingers of a bored railway clerk, never dropped into the wooden letterbox at the end of your family's lane. Historians disagree whether these ghost letters mattered, whether they were just bits of paper, or the only thread tying mud-soaked boots to cobblestone doorsteps miles away. Some diaries say a lost letter could break a mother faster than a telegram ever would. No word is sometimes worse than the worst word. Beside you, your bunkmate fingers a letter too, the edges stained with oil and rain. He never wrote it, his sweetheart did. Perfumed once, though the only scent now is trench smoke and the sharp bite of the frost creeping over your shoulders. He reads it aloud sometimes, his voice cracked with cold and a longing too big for the dugout walls. Wait for me. Be brave. Pray hard. Words softer than gunfire, but sharper too. You slip your letter back in your pocket when you hear boots squelching in the mud outside. The post runner stumbles in half, your age boots 3 sizes too big sack hanging limp from his shoulder. He drops it by the brazier with a shrug. Nothing for your corner tonight. Nothing for you. You nod at him anyway. Thanks for nothing is still. Thanks when your hands ache for a scrap of news that someone remembers your name outside these wire walls. A rat noses at the sack, sniffing for crumbs, where the real warmth hides between the lines of ink, the press of a thumbprint against a closing flap. You shoo it away with your boot half-hearted. The rat returns anyway, like the cold, like the waiting. No man's land claims some letters before the censors ever do. A lad, last week, stuffed one in his breast pocket before crawling out under wire. They found the letter, days later, waterlogged, folded tight over a name that no longer answered at roll call. Some say it was better that way. No black bars of censorship, no polite stamp from a censor's pen. Just a secret kept by the mud. You think about starting a new one tonight. Tell her about the frost, the boots, the whistle that sends you over the top before the sun burns the mist away. But what's the point? You know how it will end. Ink, smudged by wet sleeves, folded corners, soft with too many cold fingers, hidden in your pocket until you either post it or you don't. Scholars still puzzle over how many truths sank into these letters that never arrived, confessions, never spoken aloud, prayers for forgiveness, tucked between stiff greetings and trembling sign-offs. Maybe they're buried somewhere under the frost and wire paper bones among the real ones. You tuck your letter deeper into your coat, close your eyes against the flicker of the dying candle. Outside, the wind rattles the dugout's tin walls, humming a lullaby sharp as the barbed wire that keeps you penned in tonight. You dream of a train, carrying your words home a mother's fingers, tracing each line under the soft glow of a kitchen lamp. But the dawn always comes first, colder than the candle's warmth, louder than the truth you keep folded in your pocket. Somewhere between the last whisper of frost and the first barked order, the trench hums with a rumor, heavy as the guns themselves, final push. The words drift down the line, slipping from chapped lips and bitten nails, weaving between cigarette smoke and the rustle of men lacing boots they never truly untie. You wake before the sergeant calls your name, boots already half on, fingers numb as you fumble the laces. The dugout smells of damp wool and burnt wicks, a soft funeral for another night you survived in this graveyard carved of mud and iron. They hand you fresh rounds, though fresh is a lie. The brass gleams dull under your fingertips, cold as the breath pooling in your collar. You tuck each round into your belt pouch like coins for a ferryman who never stops rowing these blood-churned fields. Your mate sits cross-legged by the sandbags, rolling a last cigarette. He holds it out, the flame sputtering at the match tip, the paper trembling in the hush that settles when men pretend courage grows thicker in silence. He jokes about the push, says winter's cold is kinder than Fritz's bullets. You grin, though it doesn't reach your eyes. Some truths only echo behind your ribs. Historians still debate if these final pushes meant anything, whether inches gained in frozen fields ever balanced the cost, scratched on gravestones no one had time to carve yet. Some say it was strategy, some say madness. Most diaries simply call it orders. Orders don't need sense, just boots, just boys. Just one more crawl through barbed wire before the ground swallows another name. The sergeant's voice scrapes the air raw. He's not shouting, no point. Every lad knows what the whistle means when it comes at dawn. You gather your kit in the weak gray light rifle heavy on your shoulder, mud already clinging to your boots before you even step from the dugout's mouth. A rat darts over your foot, fat on weeks of scraps and secrets. You watch it vanish under the duckboards, free to scavenge another day, while boys bigger and braver shiver behind sandbags. Sometimes you think the rats will inherit this place. When the push is done, kings of a kingdom gnawed out from blood and iron. You clamber up the fire-step shoulders, brushing the cold wood as you find your place in the line. Breath clouds drift from mouths pressed tight over teeth, chattering more from dread than winter's bite. The man to your left whispers something, watch your feet on the wire, like it matters. Like a twist of iron barbs is the worst waiting in the dark ahead. Your mother would laugh if she saw you. Now boots too big, coat too thin, a scrap of lace tied round your wrist, where she stitched it last Christmas to remind you there's warmth somewhere. You touch it now, thumb brushing the frayed edge as if it might hold back the frost, the fear, the memory of every mate who didn't make it back from the last final push. A flare sputters above, hanging low, throwing pale shadows on faces lined up like toy soldiers waiting for a child's breath to knock them down. You tighten your grip on the rifle, feel the bolt bite your palm as if it's trying to say, ready or not. Researchers still argue if the pushes broke the line or just the boys who tried to hold it. Some say winter did more to end this war than bullets ever could snow, and ice-burying machines and men alike, in a silence so deep, even the guns sound shy in its shadow. The sergeant glances at his watch. One breath, two. He lifts the whistle to his lips. You draw your own breath through teeth that feel too big in your mouth. Around you, boots scrape mud, a soft chorus for an orchestra of steel and frost. In that heartbeat before the shriek, you think of your father's hands fixing a fence under the spring sun, your mother's voice humming over the stove, the dog barking at sparrows in the yard. Small, warm noises drowned now by the whistle's sharp cry, slicing the dawn wide open. You step forward into wire and cold boots sinking into a world that promises nothing but another yard of mud and a hope that winter's chill might be softer than the bullets waiting on the other side. The last echo of the whistle still rings in your ears long after the boots have stopped pounding, and the frost has settled where footprints bled into the earth. Armistice echo. They say the guns fell silent at the 11th hour on the 11th day, in a month when frost once again tucked its cold hand into every collar and sleeve. You stand there, rifle slung over your shoulder, like a question you're too tired to ask. Around you, the trench hums, not with orders or rum jokes or barked curses, but with nothing at all. Silence thicker than mud, sharper than wire, heavier than any shell you ever ducked under. Historians write pages about that moment. Some say cheers went up, like fireworks hats, tossed skyward boys, hugging boys under the wide November sky. But diaries tell a softer truth. Many just stood there, boots sinking deeper in the sludge, fingers twitching on rifles they suddenly didn't need. You lean back against the sandbag wall, staring at the frost rimming the duckboards. You expect to feel light, to feel something crack free in your chest where fear used to sit like a stone. But nothing comes, no wild laugh, no victory grin. Just the silence coiling through your ears like a whisper you can't make out. Beside you, a mate fumbles with a cigarette hands, trembling, though there's no gunfire to jolt him anymore. He tries to strike the match 3 times before it flares. When he lifts it to his lips, the flame dances in eyes that have seen too much to be bright again. No scholars agree what the silence sounded like. Some say it roared louder than the shells, a hush so vast it pressed your heartbeat flat. Some say the birds came back at once, wing beats stitching the sky, where artillery smoke once smudged the sun. You hear no birds now, just the faint creak of a helmet strap, the cough of someone, too, used to trench air to breathe clean. Your fingers trace the stock of your rifle. The wood is warm from your grip, but your hands feel empty now. A thing made for killing, with no more killing left to do. You wonder if your mother would even know what to say if she saw you now. Mud-caked eyes hollowed out like the shell craters lining no man's land. Someone laughs sharp, sudden then swallowed fast when no one joins in. The sound rings across the trench like a stray bullet. You wish someone would sing. You wish someone would cry. Instead, the lads stand there shifting from foot to foot boots, frozen into muck that's had too long to learn their names. A rat darts out bold as ever. It pauses near your boot nose, twitching at crumbs dropped from someone's pocket. The same rat maybe you chased off when the letters came or didn't. He looks at you like he's waiting for you to move, but you don't. The armistice has come, but the rat still rules this place. You rub your thumb over the scrap of lace your mother stitched for you, a charm against cold that never quite worked. It feels softer now, out of place in a trench that's supposed to be done with killing, but isn't quite done with boys like you. Somewhere down the line, the sergeant clears his throat, voice hoarse from years of shouting. He says something about going home, about packing up, about trains and papers and signatures. No cheers, just nods. Boots scrape duckboards, slick with morning frost. You wonder what home feels like now, if the kitchen still smells of warm bread, if the dog still barks at strangers by the gate, if the quiet there will feel kinder than the quiet here. Historians can argue that too, whether silence is freedom or just another trench you'll dig alone in your head. Above the sky is clear blue and wide in a way it never was when the shells stitch their gray threads overhead. You breathe it in, but the mud under your boots doesn't let you float. It clings like a memory you'll carry on your boots all the way back down the platform steps. You look at your mate, smoke curling from his lip, eyes hollow but alive. You nod. He nods back. There's nothing else to say. The war is done. The silence isn't. Yet even when the guns fall silent, the trench clings to you, mud in your boots, brass in your pocket, tiny echoes of comfort hammered out where ruin used to roar. Imagine the stale smell of gunpowder lingering in your nose as you run a finger over the grooves of a ring carved from a spent shell casing. Why did they bother when the next barrage could come any second? What did these small, secret tokens mean when life was measured in inches of mud? You crouch low as you reach the lip of the trench boots, sinking into the wet floorboards that pass for a path. Just ahead, the soft scrape of metal on metal draws you closer. A young private sits cross-legged, the flicker of a candle turning his pale face gold as he works an empty shell casing into a rough circle. This is trench art, one of the oddest luxuries to bloom in a place designed for anything but beauty. By day, this brass might have torn through air with a shriek. Now, in hands chapped and raw, it becomes something warm to touch: a ring, a pendant, a tiny lighter shaped like a keepsake from home. One well-documented example shows soldiers fashioning matchbox covers with delicate engravings, family names, a sweetheart's initials, or sometimes just a crude joke about the generals. Historians still debate whether trench art was a rebellion against the ugliness of war, or simply an idle way to keep trembling hands busy. One curious fact: some pieces found their way back to the front lines as gifts, mothers sending sons trinkets made from the same brass that once fired over enemy lines. You run your thumb over the cool metal. Imagine the patience it took to carve fine lines by candlelight, to smooth edges with a bit of boot leather and spit. The trench is a nightmare at night. Rats scrabble along duckboards. Cold mist seeps into your coat. But here, in this tiny corner, someone is making beauty from destruction. A soft joke drifts your way. If I carve my own wedding ring, maybe I'll survive long enough to use it. The other men chuckle low and tired. Some hold half-finished charms in their pockets, like talismans against the next shell. There's a peculiar comfort in these tiny acts of creation, like scribbling your name on a ruin before it's swallowed by mud. No grand declarations here, just brass turned gold under candle flame, a private rebellion etched in scraps. You shift your weight, careful not to knock over the candle. Outside, the war drone's on, but inside this dugout, a ring gleams faintly. It won't stop the shells or the hunger, but maybe it makes the next hour softer. Maybe it reminds you that hands made for killing can still make something gentle. A faint rustle in the trench signals another strange comfort, one that breathes pause at scraps and curls warm against shivering soldiers. Tonight, you meet the frontline pets, the unexpected guardians of sanity in mud and fear. At the far end of the dugout, you spot a wiry terrier nosing through a battered mess tin. His ribs show, but his tail wags as he circles a group of men trading stories in hushed voices. Dogs like him didn't arrive by command. They found their way to the front as naturally as rats and lice. But unlike those pests, they were welcomed with open arms. Picture it: the thunder of distant artillery, the sharp tang of wet earth, and in your lap, the soft weight of a stray dog who trusts you more than the officers ever could. Cats prowl the sandbags too, slinking from one shelter to the next, collecting ear scratches and bits of tinned meat from every exhausted hand. Even pigs roamed certain trenches small enough to dodge bullets, clever enough to beg scraps from the field kitchens. Some scholars still argue whether these animals were truly pets or simply pest control that earned a name and a collar. But ask any trench survivor, and they'll tell you these four-legged soldiers saved men's minds. A dog's bark might drown out the scratching in the walls. A cat's purr might warm a chest gone hollow with homesickness. One story whispers of a bulldog named Satan, so called because he bit every officer who dared to yell too loud. He strutted up and down the line, a mascot of defiance wrapped in fleas. Another tale remembers a ginger cat who perched on the shoulder of a sergeant as he wrote letters home, tail flicking ink across pages bound for another world. The presence of these animals softened brutal nights. It gave men something to feed, to guard, to laugh about when laughter was scarce as dry socks. Historians debate how much these pets really shaped morale, but a muddy paw print on a letter home says more than any official record. Lean in closer, hear the private whisper to his terrier, telling him secrets no brother in arms could keep safe. Soldiers who couldn't sleep found comfort in a heartbeat pressed to their chest. In the lull between shelling, a piglet's squeal might spark jokes that echoed across the wire, carrying warmth into the endless night. Your boots brush the soft fur of the terrier as he circles back for another scrap. He presses his wet nose into your palm, a reminder that even here, where barbed wire cuts the sky and the ground trembles like an angry drum, life can still seek out warmth. You wonder briefly if the soldiers dreamed of home when they felt these whiskers brush their chins. Did they imagine farmyards, kitchen hearths, a familiar barn cat curled up beside the stove? Or did they cling tighter to this new family, furry, ragged, loyal under fire? The terrier curls up now, at the foot of your cot tail, thumping once before sleep claims him. You watch his sides rise and fall, a soft, steady rhythm beneath the boom of distant guns. Outside the trench, hums with restless sounds, boots splashing through puddles, low curses, the distant slap of mud against canvas. Inside, there's this small patch of warmth, a tiny heartbeat that doesn't care about orders or borders. Just a stray, turned guardian, turned friend. There's no medal for these animals, no plaque, just fading photographs of men smiling beside dogs in gas masks or cats perched on helmets like furry crowns. Tiny comforts in an endless war, keeping company with soldiers who needed something, anything to believe in besides the next dawn's shelling. You shift on the duckboards, careful not to wake the terrier. Beyond the sandbags, the night grows colder. But here in this stolen moment, you breathe easier, warmed by the soft snore of a creature who never asked why the world had come undone, only that you share your last biscuit. A quiet shiver runs down your spine as the soft snores of the trench pets fade behind you, replaced by the low murmur of men huddled around a battered crate. They lean in, eyes flickering between cards and dice, trying to forget the wet earth beneath them. Here in this soggy corner of nowhere, you discover the improvised games that filled endless hours between shellfire. Lean closer. The dice clatter onto a mud-smeared crate lid, rolling through sticky puddles that no one bothers to mop up. A young corporal laughs too loud for the hour as he pockets a scrap of chocolate tonight's steak. These aren't high-stakes games in the way officers might imagine. No gold coins, no treasure maps, just rations. Socks, a rare tin of jam. Small luxuries that mean everything when the world above the trench is a storm of iron. Historians still squabble over how organized these gambling dens really were. Some letters home describe elaborate card tables hidden in the deepest dugouts, candlelit tournaments stretching through the night. Others insist the games were nothing but fleeting rolls of dice between bombardments, a nervous tick more than true leisure. The truth, as always, slips somewhere between. A private near you pulls out a deck of cards so worn the corners feel like soft cloth. He deals slowly, savoring each slap of cardboard on the crate. The men shift draw cards, place bets they'll regret if dawn comes early with fresh orders to climb the ladders. One flips a coin bent and blackened by the same blast that tore his boot in half last spring. He laughs when he loses, curses when he wins. It's all the same when the next whistle blows. There's a sweet irony here, improvised casinos in the least luxurious place on earth. The rain soaks through sandbags, drips onto their shoulders, splashes onto cards. No one cares. This game is a soft rebellion, a small way to say, tonight luck might be ours. Just tonight, chance answers to us, not to some general with a map and a pencil. A curious detail. Some trenches had dice carved from leftover bones, goat shins, or pig knuckles cleaned and etched with soot. Imagine shaping each pip with a dull bayonet, flicking the finished cube into a muddy corner, and daring fate to smile back. Overhead, a shell moans in the distance, but no one flinches. A hush falls as a pair of dice rolls, slow, bouncing once, twice, then settling into the soft groove, worn deep by hundreds of forgotten throws. A groan, a laugh, a muffled swear word, anything to push back the thought that outside this makeshift casino luck is far crueler. One old sergeant squints at his cards, holds them close to the guttering candle. He mutters a joke about losing his pay, though no one's seen real pay in months. He bets his last tin of condensed milk, a treasure better than gold. Around him, the men nod, push forward their stakes, a biscuit, a half-smoked cigarette, a promise to stand guard tomorrow. Researchers love to argue whether these games were just desperate time killers or something deeper, a way to keep death at bay, to remind the men they could still win at something however small. A single ration, won tonight, might sweeten the morning stew, or buy you an hour of extra warmth when the world above turns ugly again. You crouch lower, watch the candle flame flicker against their faces, mud-smeared, hollow-eyed, yet alive, with fleeting hope. A pair of dice tumbles into your lap. You roll. You lose, but you grin anyway, because here, in this dripping hole in the ground, a lost bet means you're still here to lose. The game drifts on into the night. Feet shuffle, laughter spills into the damp air. A deck of cards folds away as the next man steps forward with a battered pack of dominoes. The rain drums harder on the tin roof overhead, but no one moves to leave. They'll sit here tossing dice, flipping cards, betting away scraps of comfort until the next flare bursts in the sky and calls them back to the business of survival. And for now, just now, luck hums softly under the rattle of bones and tin, promising these weary gamblers a few more moments where the only thing that matters is the roll, the flip, the hush that follows. A low hum drifts over the mud-soaked trench, weaving through damp sandbags and duckboards slick with last night's rain. It's not the shriek of shells or the bark of an order. It's something softer, strangely defiant. Tonight, you stand among men who carry home in their throats trench songs that rose and fell like fragile prayers in the cold. Somewhere ahead, half hidden behind a curtain of mist, a corporal props himself against a dugout wall, humming a tune that doesn't quite match the roar of distant guns. His voice trembles on the higher notes, but he keeps singing, quiet, steady, the way a mother might hum to hush a frightened child. Around him, other voices join in ragged harmony, threading through a place made for anything but music. Picture this: a line of soldiers hunched under tarps, water dripping onto their shoulders as they tap out rhythms on empty tins. A chorus grows, sometimes bawdy pub songs, sometimes old folk melodies dragged from childhood farmyards and tiny village chapels. It doesn't matter that half the verses are forgotten or wrong. What matters is the hush that follows each line, the shared silence when the final note fades into the fog. Historians puzzle over the real power of these trench songs. Were they rebellion or ritual? Did they lift spirits, or just remind men how far they'd fallen from warm hearths and bright parlors? Surviving diaries argue both sides. Some praise the comfort of a familiar chorus. Others confess that the songs only made the ache for home sharper. One forgotten scrap of trivia: some units collected these tunes in battered notebooks, tiny songbooks that still surface today, pages stained with mud and ink. A few were smuggled home, tucked into coat linings, beside a lock of hair, or a crumpled photo of a girl who might still be waiting. You catch a line drifting your way, a lullaby twisted into a joke, lyrics swapped to mock the generals and the endless mud. One man taps his helmet like a drum. Another whistles through cracked lips. If you close your eyes, you might almost forget the wire overhead, the trenches snaking like scars across the countryside. For a moment, it's just voices carrying warmth from one pair of frozen lungs to another. An old sergeant sings low, barely moving his mouth. The song's an old drinking tune, back when beer was cheap and no one worried if the cellar was dry by morning. Now, the verses slip into new shapes. Verses about stolen rations, lice too stubborn to drown officers, too pompous to dodge the mud. Each line lands soft as a joke and sharp as a shovel. Not all these songs stay light. Some drop to whispers when the wind picks up dirges for lost friends, laments for summers buried under barbed wire. A young private hums an old folk melody, half remembered from evenings by his mother's stove. Another joins in, weaving a new verse that swaps kitchen hearths for flickering candles stuck in old wine bottles. One curious detail: enemy lines often had their own songs, drifting back across the mud like ghostly replies. There are stories, hard to prove, but impossible to kill, of Christmas Eves, when opposing trenches hummed carols into the same dark sky. Some say voices met in the no man's land. Fragile bridges spun from notes and hope. You shift closer to the group, feel the vibration in your chest as the tune finds a soft groove. No one claps when the humming fades. There's no need. The song did its work, soothed the nerves, filled the trench with echoes warmer than any blanket. Outside, the wind rattles a sheet of corrugated iron nailed above a dugout door. The hum lingers anyway, ghosting through puddles and overscattered shell casings turned into charms. In this place, music isn't performance. It's proof that lungs can do more than gasp for air under smoke. You imagine what these men might sing tomorrow, or whether tomorrow will come at all. For now, the melody curls around your thoughts like smoke from a candle stub, wrapping you in the softest armor this mud can offer: a tune, a memory, a note that says, "We're still here." And so they hum low and steady until the next shell interrupts the chorus, and the trench remembers its purpose once more. A muffled laugh escapes down the trench as a battered sheet of paper passes from one muddy hand to the next. Beneath flickering candlelight, you lean closer to see what's got these men grinning like schoolboys caught behind the shed. Tonight, you discover the secret clubs of the trenches, those hidden little societies that turned boredom and bitterness into whispered satire on scraps of stolen paper. Picture it a dugout, no bigger than a tool shed. A handful of soldiers hunched over a crate that serves as their printing press. A crate, a battered typewriter if they're lucky, or just a stub of pencil and the back of an empty ration box. They call themselves editors, reporters, poets. And what they publish is more dangerous than grenade sarcasm. Some trench newspapers survive in archives today, fragile relics of gallows humor. They go by names like the Wipers, Times, the BEF Times, or the Mudhole Chronicle mock titles for grim realities. Inside, you'd find absurd stories about the weather's conspiracy against the battalion fake ads for guaranteed shell-proof umbrellas, or open letters to generals who never read them. It was part therapy, part middle finger raised politely at fate. Historians still squabble about how widespread these secret clubs were. Some claim every regiment had a scribe or two with a wicked pen. Others argue only the luckier units, with time and candlelight to spare, managed to produce anything legible. But the truth trickles down in snippets, worn clippings, tucked into diaries, remembered lines scribbled into letters home. You watch as a corporal with ink-smudged fingers reads aloud from tonight's edition. The men lean in boots, squelching in the muck, shoulders brushing close. The article, A Fake Recipe for Trench Stew Deluxe, 2 spoonfuls of mud, 1 bootlace, a generous pinch of pipe ash. Serves 12 if rationed, none if lucky. A private chuckles so hard he nearly drops his tin mug. Another suggests adding rat tail for flavor. These moments matter. Between blasts and orders and silence that weighs too heavy, these scribbled jokes lift the gloom like flares. Bright brief, then gone. One odd relic from the archives, some trench papers ran classified ads. You could find notices about lost socks, promotions for imaginary cinemas showing films that hadn't been invented yet, or lonely hearts columns poking fun at the idea of love in a ditch full of lice. Some editors even took gentle digs at high command, so gentle in fact that any real officer reading it might pretend not to notice the barbs tucked in the jokes. By the candle's flutter, you imagine these scribes hunched over pages stolen from supply forms, half a pencil shared between 3 men, laughter stifled behind muddy sleeves. They knew they risked punishment for insubordination if the wrong officer caught a glimpse. But what's discipline compared to the grim joke of living in a hole waiting for the next order to charge into nowhere? A whisper floats through the group. One day, they'll print our stories for real. A soft scoff follows. Nobody here believes in glory, but the idea of outlasting the mud in ink, that's worth a grin. Scholars debate whether these underground publications were true resistance or just survival. Maybe they were both mocking the absurdity, so you don't drown in it, reminding each man that his mind at least was still free to scribble jokes no shell could silence. The corporal folds the page and tucks it under his coat. He promises a new issue tomorrow if the typewriter ribbon holds out. You see men drift back to their posts, lighter somehow, carrying smirks hidden under grime and cold. The secret club dissolves into the trench's endless night, but the laughter sticks to the walls like a stubborn shadow. Somewhere overhead, the sky cracks with a distant shell, but down here, a joke survives the echo. You run a thumb along the margin of the scrap, muddy-inked defiant. If a general ever read it, maybe he'd laugh too. Or maybe he'd rip it up. Either way, tomorrow's edition is already forming in the dark, whispered between men who know sometimes the sharpest weapon is the word they pass hand to hand. A hush falls over the trench as a rumor drifts from one mud-caked mouth to another. Tonight there'll be a feast, if you can call it that. The air smells the same as always, damp earth gun oil, a trace of stale tobacco. But beneath it all, something warm and sharp floats through wine. Stolen wine, if the whispers are true. Tonight, you witness the holiday feasts, strange stolen moments when Christmas found its way into the trenches. You slip along a line of dugouts, boots squelching in the half-frozen sludge. Ahead, the glow of a makeshift lantern bounces off tin cups and dented mess tins laid out like fine silver. A battered crate serves as a table. An old blanket does its best impression of a tablecloth. The guests, soldiers with socks for napkins, helmets for bowls, and stories that bubble up like steam from the stew pot. Somewhere beyond the wire, the enemy does the same. History remembers the famous Christmas truce of 1914, an accidental ceasefire where songs crossed no man's land and gifts traded muddy hands. But the lesser-known truth, these tiny feasts kept happening whispered and hidden long after commanders banned them. No man wanted to advertise peace in a place designed for endless war. Tonight, they've scraped together tinned meat-stale biscuits, softened in lukewarm broth, maybe a twist of chocolate if a parcel came through unpilfered, and the wine liberated from a half-collapsed cellar during a supply raid that no one will admit happened. Some say they traded extra boots for it. Others claim it was a gift from the enemy, slipped across the frost-bitten wire under a cautious handshake. Scholars continue to debate just how widespread these feasts were. Some diaries describe men clinking tin mugs in icy moonlight, exchanging cigarettes with men they might shoot at tomorrow. Others insist it was all rumor and echo of that first truce magnified by hope. Yet here you stand, watching a private raise his cup with a grin too big for the mud to swallow. They hum a carol, half the words swallowed by shivers. An old corporal tries to carve a turkey from a battered tin of corned beef, theatrically announcing each slice with mock grandeur. Laughter drifts over the boards, mingling with the distant pops of far-off rifles. It's absurd defiance celebrating anything when dawn might bring orders that erase all of this in a heartbeat. One peculiar note: some men pinned sprigs of pine or bits of holly above their bunks, stolen from nearby woods or smuggled in letters from home. Tiny green miracles that turn mud walls into something like hearth and hall. A flower in a tin, a ribbon tied around a bayonet, any decoration to pretend the trench was just another cold country cottage at Christmas time. A young private pops open the wine bottle. It glugs into dented cups splashing on sleeves already stained with rain and gun oil. No one complains. Each sip is sour, warm, only by the memory of vineyards they'll never see. One man jokes about visiting France again, but only for the wine, never for the trenches. The joke lands soft half-smiles flickering in the lantern glow. They know the truth many won't see another holiday, but tonight, that truth bows to candle stubs stuck in empty ration tins, to the low hum of a carol that wraps around the trench like a rough wool blanket. Historians argue whether these stolen feasts were acts of rebellion defiance or simple human need. Maybe they were all three. In a world of rations and regulations, a shared cup of stolen wine is more than a drink. It's proof that men can still taste life through the mud. You watch as one soldier tucks the last crust of biscuit into his coat pocket, saving it maybe for tomorrow's hunger or tonight's rat trap. Another drags a stick through the mud, doodling a Christmas tree beside the latrine entrance, an absurd gift for anyone who notices on their way to relieve themselves. And when the cup's empty, the candles sputter, and the song fades into the cold, they sit together a moment longer, shoulders pressed close. Not soldiers, not enemies, just cold men pretending for a few stolen hours that the world still holds room for feast and laughter. Beyond the wire rifles wait, but here under a scrap of tarp and a half-finished carol, you taste a holiday you'll carry long after the wine's gone. A soft scrape of boots on duck boards pulls you away from the fading echoes of that makeshift feast. Deeper into the trench, a dim flicker of candlelight peeks through a flap of canvas nailed between sandbags. Slip inside, mind your head, on the low beams, and breathe in the faint warmth that gathers here tonight. You step into the makeshift chapels of the trenches, holy spaces held together by tarps, crates, and unspoken hope. Inside it smells of wet wool and melted candle wax. A wooden plank pried from a shipping crate serves as an altar. A bent crucifix leans against an ammo box. Around it, men kneel on sandbags. Helmets remove fingers, worrying rosary beads made from spent bullets strung on wire. A chaplain, some young man with a weathered book and boots just as muddy as theirs, reads softly over the low, steady drip of water from the roof. It's not a cathedral. No stained glass, no organ pipes, no polished pews. But here, under the whisper of distant shellfire, these chapels felt more real than any stone church back home. They sprang up in tunnels, dugouts, even hollowed craters when the front line shifted too fast to build a proper shelter. A bit of canvas for a roof, a candle stuck in a bottle sanctuary enough. Historians still argue whether these chapels offered comfort or simply masked the dread that clung to every muddy boot. Letters hint at both a quiet place to confess to, forgive, to believe that somewhere beyond this damp grave, a gentler world still waited. One curious fact: some men carved tiny crucifixes from shrapnel tin or wood from broken rifle stocks. They hid them in their breast pockets, talismans that jostled against letters from home. Others shaped tiny stars of David or crescent moons from leftover wire carrying faith stitched into uniform seams. A young private kneels, whispering a prayer that drowns beneath the wind, howling through torn canvas. Next to him, another soldier stares into the flame of a single candle, lips moving without sound. A few yards away, an old sergeant simply sits cross-legged, head bowed, but eyes open, perhaps praying, perhaps dozing. In the trench, faith is a fragile thing, sometimes offered in words, sometimes only in silence. A peculiar moment on some nights, prayers weren't about victory. Not really. More than one diary records men praying for rain to stop for lice, to spare them sleep, for a single hot meal unshared with rats. Some prayed for the enemy too, a strange echo of humanity across the wire. May they miss their shot. May they see home again, same as us. You lean closer to the candle. Wax drips onto an upturned helmet, hissing as it hits cold steel. The chaplain's voice trembles at the edges worn thin by long nights, and the stories pressed into his hands. Confessions of fear, of cowardice, of small cruelties, done when the mud and hunger got too deep to stand in. Scholars debate how these makeshift chapels survived under strict military orders. Technically, no space could be spared for prayer alone, but men found a way carving out these corners when the war wasn't watching too closely. Some chaplains wrote homilies on the back of ration labels, delivered sermons half in Latin, half in jokes to soften the dread. A soft shuffle, a soldier stands, crosses himself, slips out through the flap. Another takes his place boots, leaving fresh tracks in the straw, scattered on the dugout floor, to keep puddles at bay. Above, rain taps the canvas, like soft applause for prayers no one will record in history's ledgers. In this trench, where letters from home arrive damp and dreams of peace go stale like forgotten bread, this tiny chapel flickers on fragile defiant. It offers no promise of survival, no shield from the next shell. Only a candle, a word, a breath of warmth that tastes almost like forgiveness. You draw back through the canvas boots, sinking again into the waiting mud. Behind you, the candle glows a tiny sun trapped in a bottle. Outside, the trench waits cold, endless, but just for a moment, softened by prayers whispered into the damp earth. You trudge back through the winding trench mud, clinging to your boots, like a curse you can't quite scrape off. Behind you, the candlelit prayers fade into the constant drip and patter of trench life. But ahead, you catch a sharp scent tobacco smoke mingled with the sweet tang of chocolate. You've stumbled into the barter economy, the underground marketplace that turns soldiers into traders beneath the general's noses. Picture this: a knot of men huddled around a battered ammo crate, each one clutching tiny treasures hidden in oilcloth or tin. One private holds out a square of chocolate, its edge softened by the warmth of his palm. Across from him, another man dangles a pair of thick wool socks, dry clean, the kind of luxury that makes frostbitten toes sing with hope. There's no paper money here. The currency is comfort, a cigarette for a square of soap, a ration of jam for a fresh pair of laces. If you're lucky or clever, you might trade a joke for a slice of tinned meat, a rumor for a warm corner of dugout when the rain turns vindictive. Historians still debate how organized these micro-markets really were. Some say they flourished openly, almost tolerated by officers who understood that barter kept men from losing their minds. Others insist the trade happened in shadows, each deal sealed with a whispered threat of silence if an NCO came sniffing around. One odd fragment from the archives: in some regiments, a single cigarette could be worth a whole can of bully beef if the delivery trucks missed a week. One letter home tells of a man who bartered away a wedding ring, not for food, but for a dry blanket, when pneumonia clawed at his chest. Tonight, you see a young corporal strike a deal with an older sergeant, 2 squares of chocolate for 3 hand-rolled cigarettes. They nod, like old merchants sealing the bargain, with a soft joke about who's the real winner here. In truth, both are. Chocolate means sugar energy, to stay awake through the damp watches of the night. Cigarettes mean warmth in the lungs, a tiny rebellion puffed into the damp darkness. Nearby, a pair of soldiers squat over a tattered sock stuffed with dice and bits of soap. One's offering an extra pair of boots in exchange for a promise. Watch my post tonight, and I'll throw in a matchbox. A fair trade rest is the rarest commodity here, worth more than the coin no one carries. Lean closer, and you'll hear the soft undercurrent that runs through every whispered deal. A joke, a story, a rumor traded like gold. Some say a well-placed joke can buy you warmth faster than any ration tin. Heard the major's new boots don't match one German one, British the private mutters, and the circle of men smother laughter behind cold hands. That alone might earn him half a chocolate bar. Scholars argue whether this barter economy was harmless or insubordinate. Did it weaken discipline? Did it build bonds stronger than any chain of command? letters never quite agree. Some officers turned a blind eye, knowing a warm pair of socks today might save a man's toes tomorrow, and his trigger finger with them. A curious detail: some trades spanned enemy lines, quiet understandings forged between snipers who missed on purpose or sent a chocolate bar skimming across the mud during an unofficial ceasefire. Tiny truces as fragile as a wrapper folded into a pocket. You watch as tonight's little market begins to dissolve. A fresh shell winds overhead, close enough to shake the crates stacked high with merchandise. But no one scatters. The men finish their swaps, clap each other on the shoulder, slip new treasures into pockets already stuffed with mud and secrets. One last deal a joke for a promise. If I don't come back from the wire tonight, a corporal says, "Keep my boots dry for me." His mate smirks, slaps his back, agrees without a word. That's how it works. Trade today. Survive tonight. Gamble on tomorrow. You step away, boots heavier with damp, but your pockets lined with borrowed warmth. Out here, in this maze of mud and barbed wire, a square of chocolate, a dry pair of socks, or a whispered rumor might be the only currency that keeps your heartbeat steady when dawn crawls over the edge of no man's land. When the final swap is done and the last match struck, the trench softens under a hush that only comes when the guns sleep. Tonight you drift toward the flicker of candles arranged in a circle half hidden behind a sagging sandbag wall. Here in the heart of the mud, you find the midnight story, circles those secret gatherings where wild tales bought men a few hours of borrowed sleep. Slip closer. A ring of soldiers sits cross-legged on damp planks, salvaged from a broken ammo crate. One man leans forward, voice low, spinning a story about a ghost that drifts through the wire on nights when the moon ducks behind the clouds. His audience shifts, boots, scraping breaths, held. Each man holds something warm, a cup of tea if they're lucky, a cigarette glowing soft in the dark if they're not. Historians disagree on whether these gatherings were common or just the stuff of nostalgic memoirs. But scraps of diaries hint at nights when stories mattered more than rations. Not grand speeches, no heroic nonsense, just strange tales about girls waiting back home, about the one time they stole an officer's whiskey barrel, about the trench rat that grew fat enough to earn a name and a rank. One curious detail: some circles crowned a king of lies, a storyteller so skilled he'd be exempt from sentry duty if he could spin the best yarns. A soft barter trade, a ghost story for an hour of sleep, a scandalous rumor for a sip of someone's hidden flask. Tonight's king leans back, pipe clamped between his teeth eyes, gleaming in the candle glow. He's describing a village so far behind the lines that even the shells forget its name. He claims there's a woman there who reads tea leaves for passing soldiers, whispering when the next barrage will come. Some swear they've met her. Others scoff and ask for another ghost instead. You sit just outside the circle's edge, candlelight catching on the steel buttons of your coat. A rat scurries past your boot, but no one flinches. Not tonight. The old sergeant beside you nods along to the tail lips, twitching in a half smile. Maybe he's heard this one before. Maybe he's remembering a better version told years ago in a pub far from this endless muck. A low laugh bubbles up when the storyteller's pipe sputters out mid-sentence. He taps it on his boot, relights it with a shaky match, and carries on like the interruption never happened. Around him, heads lean closer. The circle tightens, shoulders brushing. In this place, where distance is measured in shells and shots, closeness is a rebel's comfort. Scholars puzzle over what these tales gave the men: hope, distraction, or just a lullaby disguised as bragging rights. Some letters home record entire nights lost to stories, punctuated only by a sudden shout from the line or a distant rumble of guns reminding them that dawn is always hungry for noise. The King of Lies shifts gears, now voice dipping, as he weaves a new thread, this time about a ghost dog that prowls the wire, sniffing out lost boots and stray socks for soldiers who've bartered theirs away. A few men snicker. Someone tosses a crust of bread to the shadows, half joking they're feeding the spirit to keep it loyal. One man, barely older than a schoolboy, hugs his knees tight to his chest, eyes wide. Maybe he's half believing it. Maybe he's just grateful for the warmth that comes with listening, the hum of voices softening the edges of the trench walls. A shell moans, far off, too far to matter tonight. The King of Lies pauses, looks around his circle, then draws a breath for the next twist. His voice drops, then rises, then hushes to a conspiratorial whisper only a story can hold. The men lean in, letting the mud, the wire, the cold slip away for just a heartbeat. When the last line drops into silence, no one claps. They only shift, mutter a thank you, toss him a piece of chocolate or a dry match for tomorrow. Payment enough. The candles gutter their flames, swallowing shadows before the trench's true dark reclaims them. You stand, boots numb, but heart oddly warm. The story circle breaks apart in slow, reluctant shuffles. Each man drifts back to his patch of trench pockets lined with a ghost or two to keep him company till the guns speak again. And tonight, when you close your eyes beneath your scratchy blanket, maybe you'll hear that ghost dog sniffing at your boots, returning some warmth you didn't know you'd traded away. Dawn is still a rumor when you slip deeper into the warren of dugouts, past snoring men, stale smoke, and the last glow of candle stubs fighting off the damp. In a corner so cramped you can't stand up straight, you find another secret comfort of trench life, sketching trenches where pencil meets paper to prove there's more to see here than mud and blood. A young private kneels in the flickering light of a single lamp, its flame bending with each cold draft that slips through the wooden slats. In his hands, a battered notebook, pages curled at the edges from damp fingers, and nights spent hidden inside a coat. His pencil scratches lightly, a duckboard path winding through barbed wire, a helmet perched on a stake, a rat the size of a loaf of bread caught mid-scamper. Historians still debate whether these sketches were art or documentation. Was the soldier an artist trying to survive the monotony, or a quiet cartographer preserving the war for some distant truth? Letters home suggest both. Some families found envelopes smudged with charcoal, tiny maps of dugouts, cross-hatched portraits of messmates huddled in corners, even cartoons poking fun at the commanding officers who strutted dry while the men waded waist-deep in filth. A curious detail: some soldiers used pencil stubs so short they tied them to twigs with wire like a makeshift paintbrush for the desperate. Others carved pen nibs from scrap tin and dipped them into ink, brewed from soot and rainwater. No fancy supplies, just resourcefulness and a stubborn need to draw something other than death. You crouch beside the private close enough to hear the faint scratch as he shades the folds in a sandbag wall. His breath fogs in the chill, but he doesn't seem to mind. Each line traps the chaos outside, shrinks it down to a page that can be folded, hidden, carried. A bit of control wrestled from a world that refuses to obey. Over his shoulder, you spot other pages pinned to the dugout's timber beams. Little galleries of half-finished scenes, Men playing dice under an oil lamp, a sketch of the chaplain's makeshift altar, a doodle of a cat curled on a soldier's knee-tail, flicked smugly at the cold. A quiet rebellion in pencil and paper. One drawing catches your eye, a cartoon of a trench newspaper editor wearing a crown ink stains for jewels. A nod maybe to last night's secret club. Even here, the jokes linger in graphite, tucked between shadows and tin cups of cold tea. Some of these sketchbooks survived the trenches now pressed flat under glass in dusty museum drawers. Researchers peer at them through magnifying glasses, searching for coded messages, troop positions, or hidden truths. But maybe they miss the point. Maybe these lines were never meant to explain the war, just to survive it. The private doesn't speak as he works. He pauses to warm his pencil stub against the flame, flicks away a crumb of graphite from the corner of the page, and leans back to study his handiwork. He draws not for fame, but for the soft quiet that comes when your mind fixes on lines instead of shells. A rat scuttles by. He catches it with a quick sketch, a tiny blur of tail and whiskers tucked between barbed wire and a muddy boot. He smirks pencil, tapping his lip, as if to ask whether that rat deserves a name too. Maybe tonight he'll draw it again, larger, fatter, perched on the edge of a mess tin like a king of scraps. Scholars argue whether these trench sketches qualify as real art. But you see it for what it is, proof that beauty crawls out of mud when men are desperate enough to find it. A line on a page, a bit of hope stuck to a dugout wall with a rusty nail. When he's done, he rips the page free, folds it careful as a relic, and slips it into a battered tin box with others. Maybe he'll mail it home next week. Maybe he'll trade it for an extra slice of bread. Or maybe it'll stay hidden under his coat until he's somewhere softer, where the only lines he'll draw are the lazy fences of a farm far from the echo of shells. You step back into the trench boots, brushing duckboards drawn in pencil just moments ago. Behind you, the private leans close to the next blank page, already shaping tomorrow's trench, one line at a time. As the drawn lines fade behind you, the soft scratch of pencil, traded for the sharper scratch of pen on paper, you drift toward another corner of the trench, this one quieter still, but alive with words rather than sketches. Here, in a dugout, half swallowed by earth, and shadow soldiers hunch over scraps of torn notebook pages, scribbling verses under the breath of flickering lamps. Tonight, you find yourself among the poets under fire. Slip inside. Feel the walls close in timber beams dripping with damp, the floor slick with pooled rain, and the steady drip from the roof. In the corner, a pair of candles, gutter on a crate, stacked with crates, an improvised desk for those who can't sleep. A corporal sits cross-legged shoulders, hunched over a letter that isn't a letter at all, but a poem, half born between the echoes of distant guns. Historians love to argue whether these trench verses count as true poetry or just raw confession. Some turned up in published collections after the war. Fragile pamphlets printed on cheap paper, the ink smudged where blood or water blurred the lines. Others vanished with the men who carried them stuffed into breast pockets alongside prayer cards and tiny tin crucifixes. One curious fact, some soldiers wrote on the backs of orders on the blank sides of military forms on ration labels stripped from tins of bully beef. Paper was a luxury, words were not. And so the trench birthed verses that clung to whatever scraps the war forgot to claim. Lean closer. The corporal's lips move as he tests a line, 5 words crossed out, 3 rewritten above the smudge. His mate beside him taps a pencil on his helmet, waiting to read the finished lines. Not because he loves poetry in the way professors do, but because tonight it softens the walls, makes the shells feel farther away. Outside, the night hums with a restless wind that pushes drizzle through the gap in the canvas door. Inside, the only battle is with rhyme and meter, whether this word fits better than that, whether the next line should sound like home or here. The men argue it softly, voices barely louder than the crackle of the candle wick. A private mutters his own stanza under his breath, some half-remembered rhyme about a sweetheart back in Dresden. He spits the last line into the dark, a joke hidden inside the rhyme, and the men chuckle. Some stories say these verses were shared out loud, traded for chocolate squares or a sip of someone's contraband wine. Others stayed folded in pockets, hidden confessions, waiting for a dawn that might never come. One peculiar detail: entire trench magazines sometimes publish these poems buried among fake advertisements for lice repellent and sarcastic letters to generals. A sonnet about barbed wire might sit next to a cartoon of a sergeant scolding a rat. Strange neighbors on a single page, but fitting for a world where absurdity was the only honest currency. Scholars still puzzle over the purpose. Was it protest therapy, or simply something to do when the mind refused to sleep? Diaries disagree. Some men wrote to forget the mud. Others wrote to remember the mud, so no one could pretend it wasn't real when they returned home. You crouch beside the corporal, tracing the curve of his words with your eyes. He's written a line about a candle that won't die, about footsteps soft on duckboards, about a silence too big for the trench to hold. He signs it only with an initial. Maybe that's enough. Overhead, a distant boom rolls through the ground like an uninvited reminder that words are not armor. The corporal pauses pen, hovering above the page, then dips it back into a tin cup of soot ink, dragging the next line from the dark. His mate leans closer, reading along, nodding at a line he likes, grunting at one he doesn't. They won't say these poems out loud tomorrow. Tomorrow boots will slap the boards, rifles will rattle, and orders will drown out anything softer than a shout. But tonight, this dugout hums with whispers that will never make it into official dispatches. When the lamp gutters low, the corporal folds his poem, slides it into a pocket near his heart. Another page, another night survived, with words instead of bullets. You duck back into the trench's chill, leaving behind verses that might never see a page, but linger anyway. Lines scratched into the soul of a place that's forgotten how to dream. Beyond the flicker of poetry and the scratch of pencil stubs, you drift down a side tunnel where the mud gives way, just barely, to something strangely bright. Here, in this hollow dugout, you stumble upon a little-known comfort dugout decor. The quiet rebellion of flowers in tins postcards nailed to rotten beams and scraps of color defying the trench's endless gray. Duck your head as you slip inside. The ceiling droops low enough to snag your cap. Against one wall, pinned with bent nails, you spot a patchwork of images, bright postcards from Berlin. Battered photos of sweethearts holding babies you hope are still waiting somewhere warm. Some of the cards are smeared with mud fingerprints, the edges curling from too much damp breath, and too many nights pressed inside coat pockets. In the far corner, a private leans over a battered biscuit tin that sprouted something green. Tiny shoots of wildflowers plucked from no man's land during a lucky patrol. The stalks droop under the weight of trench air, but they cling on. In a world of rot and rats, these petals stand defiant, nodding gently as the lamp's heat brushes their fragile stems. Historians sometimes dismiss these decorative scraps as trivial mere distractions. But letters tell another story of men who hoarded bright wrappers from chocolate bars, just to tack a splash of color above their bunks. Some painted crude murals on dugout walls with boot polish and leftover chalk, scribbling jokes, or sketching bright suns rising over peaceful farmhouses they could only visit in dreams. One curious detail: some soldiers traded for colored pencils or scraps of ribbon from supply tents, bartering cigarettes or soap for a single line of red or blue to tie around a beam. A ribbon on a bayonet, a postcard pinned above a mess tin. Not protection, just proof that color still existed outside the monotone mud. You lean closer to read one card at eye level: a sunlit view of a lake in Bavaria, a picnic spread across the grass. Someone scrawled a date on the corner in thick pencil. Before, that's all. A word more powerful than any rank here. Before mud, before wire, before the world shrank to 50 yards of dirt and cold steel. Above your head, a small metal star dangles from a string, spinning slowly each time someone brushes past. It's made from a cut tin lid, the edges sanded smooth on a boot heel. It catches the lamplight in quick flashes, an accidental Christmas ornament that stays up all year, because there's no reason to pack it away. A sergeant squeezes past you, tracing his finger along a line of postcards. He taps one showing a row of half-timbered houses, laughs under his breath about how small they look now, compared to the vast sky of the trench. He says something about returning one day to find that same street, to stand on that same corner and smell bread instead of burning oil. Scholars wonder if these tiny shrines of color made a real difference. Did a pinned flower really push back the edge of despair? Diaries suggest they did fragile shields against the gray churn of the front. A scrap of normal pinned beside the rifle rack. A postcard to remind you that somewhere beyond the wire, children chased geese through cobblestone alleys, while men here carved brass charms and hummed songs in the dirt. One odd relic turned up years later: a dugout wall salvaged plank by plank covered in layers of postcards stuck so thick they hid every nail. When the boards were peeled away, the cards flaked off like petals, pressed in a forgotten book, stubborn proof that mud never truly wins every fight. Tonight, you watch as the private fusses over his tin can flower bed, adding a splash of water from his canteen. He hums a half song to the blooms, pretending not to notice you watching. The petals tremble in the lamp's sigh, pink and yellow, against a backdrop of grays and browns. In the trenches, beauty isn't grand or polished. It's stubborn quiet, born from scraps and tiny acts of rebellion against ruin. A flower in a tin, a star made from tin plate, a postcard half faded to ghosts, small anchors for men drifting in too much mud. You duck back through the dugout door, the petals swaying behind you like a wave that says, "Keep going." And you do boots, sinking again into cold earth, softened by a single memory of color. Past the postcards and the tiny tin flowers, your boots lead you toward a new scent, wafting down the trench, richer than gun oil, warmer than mud, sharp enough to stir your empty stomach. Here in this hidden hollow, you stumble onto the field. Kitchens, battered stoves, dented pots, and the promise of stew that tastes mostly of talk and a pinch of hope. Duck, under a sheet of canvas frayed at the edges and flapping like a torn flag. Inside, the air shifts from damp and sour to thick with steam that clings to your sleeves. A corporal stirs an iron pot, perched precariously on bricks, its handle blackened from weeks of open flame. He hums something tuneless, while the pot bubbles low each swirl, releasing the ghost of onions, maybe a scrap of meat, if the supply line was kind. Historians disagree about how these ramshackle kitchens survive shelling and ration cuts. Some say they were unofficial, improvised by men who couldn't stomach another cold tin of bully beef. Others swear certain battalions had cooks who could turn even powdered soup and stale bread into a meal that felt almost like home. Diaries whisper about secret recipes, stew braced with a splash of contraband wine or spiced with stolen pepper, hoarded like treasure. Tonight, the cook dips a battered spoon into the broth, tastes it, grimaces, tosses in a fistful of something green that might once have been herbs. He gestures to a waiting line of soldiers, each clutching an empty mug or mess tin. The queue shifts forward with quiet jokes about who'll get the lucky chunk of real meat, if any floats up tonight. One curious detail. Some kitchens had unofficial head chefs, men who used to run taverns, bakeries, even hotel restaurants before mud and wire stole their linen aprons. They brought tricks from civilian life, how to thicken thin broth with stale biscuit crumbs, how to stretch a single onion across a dozen bowls, how to make hot water feel like a feast if you tell enough jokes while you stir. You edge closer, steam curling around your face, fogging your spectacles if you wear any. The stew hits your nose salt and grease garlic if the cook got lucky at the last supply drop. Around the stove, men lean on crates and swap gossip between mouthfuls of bread, the same stale ration softened in the edge of the pot so it goes down easy. Someone produces a chunk of chocolate traded earlier in the barter market, no doubt, and breaks it into squares that vanish the moment they touch the grimy plank table. A few soldiers cradle mugs of weak tea, dipping crusts in with the soft patience of men who know there's nowhere else to be tonight. Some scholars still argue whether these kitchens really fed the body or the spirit more. Official rations rarely match the warmth that poured from these battered pots. It wasn't about the meat. There usually wasn't any. It was the hush of voices swapping ghost stories, the steam wrapping around your frozen fingers, the simple fact that men could stand shoulder to shoulder and taste something that didn't come from a tin stamped with a date. A private lifts the lid to peek inside. The corporal swats his hand away with the back of a wooden spoon, but grins as he does it. Small mischief passes for conversation here. No grand speeches, just a soft promise in every ladle tonight you'll taste warmth, however thin it might be. One old letter recalls a sergeant who claimed he could tell the morale of a whole trench just by the smell rising from the kitchen trench line. Strong stew, strong spirits, watery broth. Expect grumbling come morning parade. There's no scholarly consensus on that, but stand here long enough and you'll feel the truth of it curl into your bones like the steam curling around your cuffs. The line moves forward. Tin mugs clink. Somewhere in the dark, the wind rattles the corrugated iron roof. But inside this patch of warmth, there's laughter so soft it tastes like broth thin, but good enough to last another cold night. The corporal wipes his spoon on a rag, already black with grease. He calls out the next name ladles, another scoop into an old mug. Around him, the stew bubbles, on part warmth, part hope, part rumor. No recipe survives, no medals mark these cooks. Just the promise that for one spoonful, the war outside pauses for a sip of something hot. The stew's warmth fades into the chill as you slip back into the trench's main artery, a narrow winding track of duck boards and footsteps that never quite sleep. Steam and laughter drift behind you, replaced by the low murmur of voices threaded through the cold dawn. Here in the gray half-light, you find the deepest comfort of all brothers in arms, bound not by blood, but by mud, and whispered tales of a different life. Lean in closer. Along the dugout wall, two privates sit shoulder to shoulder, boots dangling in a shallow puddle. Between them, a battered photo passes back and forth, a farmhouse, a pair of cows, a line of fruit trees blurring into a distant horizon. One man taps the edge of the photo with a calloused finger, explaining which field grew the best barley, which she'd sheltered the old brown horse. The other nods, though he's heard this story a dozen times already, maybe 100. Historians sometimes flatten this bond into cold fact unit cohesion. They call it necessary for morale, crucial for command. But diaries hint at something warmer than orders. Here farm boys from Saxony swap orchard stories with city clerks from Berlin. They talk about cows and sisters and Sunday bread so fresh the crust could cut your lip if you weren't careful. They tell each other what they'll do when the war is done, though no one says, if out loud. One curious detail: these whispered dawn talks often took place when the trench was at its quietest, just before stand to, when the night watch ended, and the next day's orders hadn't yet arrived, to flatten hope back into routine. In that slim crack of time, futures bloomed like weeds in the mud. A corporal squats nearby, carving initials into the butt of his rifle. He tells anyone listening that when he gets back, he'll open a tavern. He'll serve beer so cold it fogs the glass bread so soft it sags under its own warmth. Someone teases him. What if no one comes? He shrugs, grins, says that's fine. He'll drink alone or with the ghosts if it comes to that. Researchers still argue about the truth of these trench friendships. Were they true, brotherhood, or just survival pacts stitched together by desperation? Letters home hint at both. Some bonds dissolved the moment the war did forgotten, in train cars heading east, or in cities that offered new jobs and new lives. Others held tight, forged so deep they outlasted the barbed wire and ration tins and quiet dread. You watch a pair of men share a half-smoked cigarette, the embers glow, the only light between them. One mutters about his father's vineyard, how he'll dig the old vines up and plant them fresh the first spring he sees home. The other talks about a small cart he'll build to haul apples to market, how he'll teach his kid to fix a wheel with rope and prayer if he has to. In the silence that follows, their breath rises in soft clouds that drift upward until the trench walls catch and swallow them. A moment later, a distant shell rumbles far off, just enough to remind everyone that dawn rarely stays gentle for long. A peculiar fragment, some men scribbled down these dreams, in notebooks, half letters never sent. Lists of plans, barns to repair fields, to sew fences to mend. Some pages survived, found years later, folded inside uniform pockets, the corners soft with handling. On a few, you see the same words over and over. When I get back. Not if, never if. You lean closer as the photo passes hands again. It's cracked at the corners now, edges stained with thumbprints and the faint smudge of candle soot. A farmhouse no one here has seen, but somehow everyone knows. The orchard, the barley field, the horse, with its winter coat thick against the frost. Each man nods like he can hear the wind through the trees, feel the barn doors creak, taste the bread hot from the oven. This is comfort, deeper than any stew or chocolate bar plans spun in whispers at dawn, strong enough to make boots feel lighter when the orders come to stand, to shoulder packs to peer over the wire at ground that rarely gives back what it takes. The brothers in arms fall silent for now, but their voices linger, drifting like steam through cold air. A promise that the farmyard waits, that bread still rises, that laughter might echo across fields no trench can claim. And then after the sketches, the songs, the feasts, and jokes, and stolen cups of warmth, there comes the final comfort, one so fragile it barely survives the dawn. It's here at the far end of the trench, where duckboards vanish into churned clay, that you stand among the returning ghosts, men who step back through the wire half-shadows, now dragging strange comforts home to a world that never quite fit them again. Picture it, the war ends on paper anyway. The trench empties. Helmets hang forgotten on bent nails. Shell casings lie buried under seasons of rain. But the men who carved rings from brass, who hummed trench songs by candlelight, who told wild tales under tarps, and sang Christmas carols across no man's land, they don't leave those comforts behind entirely. They pack them in visible souvenirs folded inside coat pockets and memory's quieter corners. Historians write these men into ledgers and casualty counts, but diaries left behind tell another truth, one the official records can't quite pin down. Some returned with fingers still ink-smudged from secret newspapers that mocked fate in muddy dugouts. Others carried battered sketchbooks tucked into battered rucksacks between a pair of socks and a letter that never made it home. A few brought nothing but silence, their only relic, the habit of humming lullabies to drown out the sound of rain on tin roofs. One curious fragment in village attics across Europe. People still find tiny brass rings hidden in wooden boxes alongside metals no one ever asked for. Rings turned gold by candlelight, and spit tokens of hope forged in the worst mud a man can stand in. Family stories say they were wedding bands, promise rings, good luck charms. Maybe all three. They came back. These ghosts sat at kitchen tables, too small for all the memories they carried. Some clung to the trench comforts like lifeboats. The man who once bartered socks for chocolate might slip a spare bar into his coat pocket every winter just in case. The corporal who carved brass charms might hammer scrap metal into garden gates, tracing initials into hinges where no general could erase them. A soft, half-known truth. Some men rebuilt the trenches in their minds when the fields went quiet. They dug them again in bad dreams, walked them on rainy nights when thunder rattled window panes. A distant roll of storm clouds could send a man burrowing back through memories of duckboards, slick with sleet candles guttering in the wind, the soft hush of a story whispered to ward off the dark. Scholars debate what these private comforts became when folded into civilian life. Were they anchors or anchors' chains? Did they hold a man steady when routine turned too quiet, or drag him backward to a place that never really let go? The records argue, but the brass ring on a grandmother's shelf says nothing at all. It just gleams faintly in the afternoon light, a small defiance against forgetting. You stand in the doorway of this memory boots planted where duckboards used to lie. You feel the hum of trench songs, in the quiet breath of old men who sat alone in train stations, tapping out dice games on wooden benches, humming tunes that no one else knew the words to anymore. A curious fragment, some of those stray cats and terriers that once curled warm in dugouts found their way home, too smuggled across borders, sleeping on farmhouse stoops instead of trench beds. They carried no medals, either just soft reminders that comfort can be as simple as a paw on a knee when the wind rattles the windows just right. So tonight, you stand with the ghosts, feeling the trench fade under your boots. You hear the hum of songs that drifted through foggy dusk, taste the ghost of chocolate traded for dry socks, see the candle stub flicker behind your eyelids. The comforts they made in that pit of mud and ruin follow them still, a soft rebellion stitched into each heartbeat that made it back. because some comforts never truly die. They echo down village lanes, glimmer from brass rings tucked in old drawers, linger in poems that survived the mud to rest quietly on library shelves. And they remind you, just as they reminded the men who carved them from ruin, that warmth can bloom anywhere, even in a trench, even in the dark. And so you drift soft and slow away from the dugouts and duckboards. Let the brass rings sleep safe in old boxes. Let the sketchbooks keep their secrets pressed flat in dusty trunks. Feel the ghost hum of trench songs wrap around your thoughts, like a blanket you've carried too far to put down now. May your night be quiet, your dreams stitched with gentle memories of stolen feasts, whispered jokes and candles that never quite went out. Let your breath ease your thoughts, slow your pulse, drift back from no man's land to a safer bed. If these echoes keep you warm tonight, maybe leave a sleepy trace behind your city, your hour, your favorite small comfort that softens the dark.